There you go. Cool. Go for it. Well, welcome everybody to Racing 101, Demystifying Racing. Whole goal here is, I'm guessing we're mostly beginning racers in the room or people wanting to become racers. So this class, we're not going to get into the weeds of, one rule over another. This is really targeted at giving you a super high level to get you on the water and having fun. And from there, you can start into the skullduggery of understanding the ins and outs of the rules and all that fun stuff. This is certainly meant to be interactive. So George and I will be really bummed if we stand here for 4 hours and talk at you. So please jump in. And with that, it's not working.
I think it's because it's still on the Zoom. She's trying to.
There we go. So with that, a couple things that we're going to cover today is we're first going to start talking about race documents. We've got a couple samples up here. We don't have a ton to take home, but if you want to take a closer look at what race documents are going to look like, and the whole idea of what you need to do to get registered for a race. We're going to talk about common course layouts, what to expect once you're out on the water. We're going to go through the starting sequence, which I know for a lot of new racers can be a bit intimidating. There's a lot going on. We're also going to spend some time going through the basic rules after our break. Again, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty little pieces, but enough to get you out there sailing safely that you're not going to get in trouble with anybody. So I'm Luke Wolbrink. I've got a CNC 35 here in Jackson Park Harbor named Zella. Been sailing for, 10-ish years, something like that, all over Lake Michigan. I've done the MAC, plenty of Queen's Cups, have been all over the place. And this is George Chapala.
Yes, I own an Erickson 29. I've been sailing offshore for over 20 years now, actually. I've been a member here at Jackson Park since 2018. Most of my experience, obviously, has been on someone else's boat, which is a great way to race. It's a lot cheaper. I have also worked on the race committee here at Jackson Park as well. So I see both sides of the race course.
Yep. And then one thing to note, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be primarily designed towards keelboat racing. A lot of it, though, the rules are all the same, whether it's dinghies or keelboats, but we're going to be focused on keelboats. So if you have any specific questions of dinghies, obviously let us know. So you got a JPYC event, so we got to give you the nickel tour. So welcome to JPYC. I see about half the room I recognize and half I don't, which is great. We have been around for, as of last year, 125 years. One of the oldest clubs in Lake Michigan came out of the end of the World's Fair. So this whole area was part of that in the 1890s. We are one of the most diverse yacht clubs in not just Chicago, but the country. It's something we're really proud of here. Just like any other yacht club, we've got a full gamut of social events, racing all summer long, from little rope control boats, frostbiting, keel boats on Wednesday nights, the whole thing. So if you're interested in JPYC, George and I are more than happy to talk to you about that. So that's the sales pitch. We kind of covered all that already. All right, great. So Chicago area racing opportunities. Really, in Chicago, it breaks down to two groups primarily. There's the CASRA group, which is Chicago Area Sail Racing Association. Did I get that right? CASRA has been around for probably 7-8 years at this point, and they are made up of 5 primary yacht clubs that do most of the racing here in the city. There's a way to coordinate schedules. So years ago, people used to just schedule the race and there was no coordination. It was kind of a mess. And now they've all come together to create a consolidated schedule. So I'm sure a lot of you saw the email blast coming out from CASRA, which is why you're here. The schedules are now up online. George is the secretary of CASRA. So if you have CASRA questions, he's your man. Am I missing anything for CASRA?
No, I think that's about it. We do actually have some example documents. Most of the weekend racing that we would have in the Chicago area is something that is, I would say, coordinated through CASRA. Each of the events is usually, it has a particular club or yacht club that actually is doing the event. And then we just kind of put it under the CASRA umbrella to kind of say, like, we're all working together.
Yep. And then the other option that I've participated in a few races is more the Midwest Open Racing Fleet. It's just people who are interested in sailing. They go out pretty much every week, I think, downtown and have races. It's just a separate organization that they don't coordinate their schedules with CASRA. So people are obviously welcome to join whatever. Our goal here is to get more people out on the water having fun. So whatever that means, it's a win. Okay, race documents. So we have a couple examples up here. There's one up here. There's really two race documents that you're going to be confronted with. The first one you're going to see is a notice of series or a notice of race, and CASRA actually published theirs earlier this week. I think they all went online. It was like something like that. And so what you're going to see in the notice of race is it's going to be the basic info to help you decide if you want to even do the race, what's it about. So it'll have information, who's the organizing authority, whether it's Jackson Park, it could be Chicago Yacht Club, Corinthian, you name it. It's going to have sort of when and where. It'll give you a date. The where might be a little ambiguous, especially in some of the CASRA documents. It'll say on Lake Michigan. Once we'll talk about sailing instructions later, which will get more specific on it, but generally, if it's in a CASRA race, it's going to be somewhere along the Chicago coastline. It'll talk high level about rules. It'll just mainly refer you to the racing rules of sailing. There might be a few amendments and changes within there. Talk about how the race is going to be scored as far as handicapping, things like that. It'll give you an idea for prizes because we all like to win shiny flags. And eligibility requirements. So this becomes important, especially if you're in a one design boat or in a dinghy and you think you're going to enter a big keelboat race. It's to understand, you know, if you're going to be able to be allowed to compete to begin with. And then there's going to be some registration information for the most part, especially if it's a CASRA race. It's all on CASRA's website. There's a link to go register on yacht scoring. It's pretty simple and straightforward. So I threw a couple words at you there, right? I threw out one design, handicap, and all these. Really, racing keelboats anyways falls into two categories. The first is one design racing, and that's a really big fleet here in Chicago is the Tartan 10s. There's the Beneteau 36-7s. There's several of them, J105s, and these are boats that are all identical. So when they're out there racing, it's sort of a traditional race in a sense that whoever finishes first wins. There's no goofy handicap ruling trying to level boats and things like that. It's more simplified racing. Each of those classes usually has their own sort of set of rules to make sure that the boats are level and just crews competing as much as possible. The other version, I think probably most people in this room fall into, is handicap racing. So this is if you have, you know, there might only be 3 of your boat in Chicago, and that's not much fun to race against the other 2 people all the time. So they open it up to anybody, and there's a series of measurements and stuff like that that we're going to talk about in a moment that help us handicap them. This is with golf or anything like that. It attempts to lower the playing field. It's not perfect, but it works pretty good, and it's largely based on recording your finishing time and applying the handicap to adjust how long you took to race. So you might finish 5th in the race as far as crossing the finish line, but you could have won the race, is the idea. And then in Chicago, most Chicago races use PERF, PHRF, it's performance handicap racing fleet. There's others, the ORC, ORR is kind of dead now. There's always these different versions, but PERF is generally considered the simplest, and it's most widely used. So certainly for beginning racers, I would recommend looking into PERF, which, speaking of which, we're going to talk about. So as I said, PERF is it's sort of an international concept. It's performance handicap racing fleet. It's a general set of guidelines that men in smoky rooms years ago started figuring out how fast boats are relative to each other. There's probably more to it than that. But the idea is there's a baseline speed for your boat, and then they adjust that speed based on exactly how you have it set up. So it's by far the most common used in North America. Locally here, it used to be LIMPERF, Lake Michigan PHRF. Now it's Midwest. They oversee not just Lake Michigan, but over in Detroit as well. And I believe Lake Superior's roped into it.
Not yet. I think it's Lake Huron and Lake Michigan.
It's Huron and Michigan. So it's Midwest PERF. It's the exact same everything if you've registered with PERF before. It's just a different name. So if you're interested in getting a handicap rating, which I think if you're going to race, you probably want to do, it's a relatively nominal fee. You go to midwestmwperf.org. If you need, the instructions are up here. I'm not going to read it at you, but you can email them. Basically, they'll get you set up with a login, and you can go from there. The casual races, which I think we now call rally races in Casra,
They might be changing the name back again.
might be casual. So that's a series of Casra does that's targeted at new racers. It sort of lowers the bar and simplifies things a bit. Does not require a perf rating. Just again, trying to keep that bar nice and low, but the organizers will assign a handicap to both that don't have one. And then specific to Jackson Park, we don't require perf ratings. We just will assign one to people who don't have a certificate.
So to say with that one, you don't worry about it as much. A lot of the performance is actually why they call it performance handicap is. Instead of like measuring your boat necessarily to like come up with a number, a lot of it is actually based on historical records from other boats. Yeah. They kind of measure what other boats doing in that site like that. Your make, your model, what does it do based upon that? We think this is what the actual speed of your boat would be if the crew were equal. Now we give you your handicap. There is a lot of data because perf has been around since decades. It's been around for decades. I think the 70s or 60s, it came up like that. There's a lot of data. So most people, like, for example, me, when I got my boat, there's not too many Erickson 29s in the area, but they were able to look up in a book and found, oh, Erickson 29, this is what we historically gave them because my boat was, someone else had done it. And so they're like, here's your rating. So if you have a casual or if you're a beer can and you don't have a certificate, we'll just find what your make and model is. You technically have to have the certificate is to the boat owner, even though it's on the boat. I'll be honest, it's like if you do it early in the year, what is it like?
$75
or 75 in a year. I think they have a really special.
It's pretty cheap. Yeah.
It's pretty cheap. You're not going to be spending a lot, and even if you go in and like the cost of a new certificate is the same as the original. So it's not like they like the first time you come in, you got to do all this data. They like charge you like $500 and then you do like it's just
No. So the way the process, and it's a good segue, is to obtain it. So first of all, you'll go online, get your login and all that, and they have a series of forms online that it's all owner reported. It's literally, they just ask you to tell us how big your boat is, how heavy it is. They have online diagrams of exactly how to measure things. But as George said, for the most part, if you have a more or less stock out of the factory Erickson 29, you can basically just put in all the stock numbers, and the link here on the bottom, sailboatdata.com, will have all of the numbers for any boat that you're going to buy. If it's not in there, you have some really weird boat. It's impressive, their database. So you're basically just going to put in all the stock numbers. If you've modified something like that, you make a note of it. For example, my boat initially never came with a bowsprit, but I added one. So I needed to report that and things. Yeah.
I would say along that line too, yes. So most of it is going to be just like, here is the make and model of the boat, right? Your big is going to be probably a stock rig. Sales are going to probably be cut fairly equivalently. They do actually ask you to measure your sail because that can be a little bit different than sail. Like, you have 150, 135, what's the size of your jib? But they do give you instructions on how to measure that. So when I went in and applied for my rating, I went out and I measured my jib and I measured I think I had to do one measurement on my head, on my mainsail. I sent that in to them like a couple days later, here's your certificate. And probably most of it was like, those numbers for my jib and my head sail are within the tolerances for what has historically been in that class. So they go like, that's your number. You are not like, you don't have a whale, your head sail is oversized. Your main isn't fantastically oversized. Your rig isn't bigger than it is. We're going to give you that rating.
Right.
So,
and the other thing is the local gentleman, Tom Barnes, who is in charge of all measurement for the Chicago area. One is an incredibly knowledgeable person, but if you have questions about how to do these things, he's really helpful. He'll take the minute to talk to you about how to measure your sail, or if you're worried about something, He's really responsive, and he's excited to just be getting people out of the water.
And I would say in many cases, like Luke said, it is owner reported. A lot in sailing is kind of on the honor system. It is possible that if you think someone out there is cheating, you can protest them. And that's only usually the time that they actually come in and like, okay, let's get someone to actually measure this. So a lot of this is all the honor system saying, like, I gave you my honest, number, and this is what it is. And if they find that you're a cheat, then they'll someone might protest you, and then they might kick you out of racing, and no one thinks that. So it's kind of
Again, this is a Corinthian sport.
exactly.
Yes.
I just have a question about the sale number. Do you need a sale number to get the handicap?
You need
Actually, no.
you do not need a sale number to get a certificate. However, if you're going to put a sale number on, get your sale number before you apply for the certificate. So I think it goes in there somewhere because it helps them look up in their database. Granted, the database usually lookup is boat make and model, boat name, owner, and then your sale number. If you got at least the boat name and the owner, and you know the make and model, like if race committee is like going, what is rating, and we go look up in the database, then we can search on that. It's not a big deal. I would say though, for racing,
It's nice.
you
You can do it without, the race committee is going to be a little grumpy.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean you need to register your sail number with US Sailing. You can certainly do that, but you don't have to. You can just go and write number 24 on your sail.
Whatever.
I was gonna say, I will admit it, I've done this. I put my whole number. That's my sale number. So the whole number for my boat from the out of the factory, a lot of people don't. That's the sale number. It's 5 digits long, and I looked in the database, no one else had it. Great. So I just said, that's my number.
Yeah, and on Perf's website, on Midwest Perf's website, there's like a rating lookup tool, and you can type in sail number, yacht name, all that stuff. So if you want to make sure that your number is unique, at least in the Midwest, you can type it in there, and if it's not taken, you're fine. If you really get advanced one day and try and register with US Sailing, you might have an issue if someone already took it. But I think if you're in this class, you're probably just trying to go sailing. So pick a number you like. Yeah, it's MWPHRF. It's right here. MWPHRF.org is where you're going to go for all this. Yep. And then at the bottom right here is obtain a handicap certificate. And under that, it has step-by-step instructions. And the links here, which are all on Midwest Perf's website, has measurement procedures, exactly how to fill the things out. It's pretty, they've made it very step-by-step and straightforward for people. Yeah, if you have questions during the break, we can talk to you. Yep. Okay.
Questions, Don? I know.
Further questions for handicapping? Great. Okay, so we've seen the notice of race. We've decided that we want to race, and we got a handicap so we can register for the race. Great. What's next? What do we do? Because that notice of race didn't have any information that's terribly useful in it, which is usually, hopefully at least a few weeks before the race, sometimes it's day of, you're going to get sailing instructions, and they'll look very similar to the notice of race. And this will have the specific information you need to sail that race. It will have the course description. So if it's a distance race, it'll tell you we're going to sail around Harrison Deaver crib and then around 4 Mile crib and back, or whatever the race is. If it's a buoy race, it'll tell you exactly how that's oriented. It'll tell you exactly what time to show up. It'll tell you exactly where to show up. All those sort of questions that when the notice of race came out and you didn't know ought to be in the sailing instructions. It even gets down into what's going to happen after the race, because a lot of times there's a party because sailors like to have fun after we've baked in the sun all day.
The US Sailing tells me we're not supposed to.
It's commonly it'll also talk about dockage potentially. So if you're doing like an out of town race, it'll tell you how to get a berth at the harbor that's hosting things. It will have, like I said, specific start times. Oftentimes we're going to talk about how races are broken down, but it'll tell you what time your specific start is, because you're not going to have 100 boats all start at once. We actually do that for one race. It's kind of a mess. It's fun. It'll tell you what channel of the radio to be on. All these sort of nitty-gritty questions you have will be in that sailing instruction document for you to show up.
I would say the NOR is really designed to be, it is that kind of announcement of the event. And like Luke said, it's the thing that you read to decide if you want to participate. The sailing instructions, or we're doing all, call it the SIs, that's the thing you want to have on board.
Yep, print it out.
Day of the race, print it out, have it available, because it's going to have all the information that you need to go race. And it used to be a little bit muddier, but in the 2021 RRS, they cleaned it so that it would be like, in theory, if I go out and race, I'm bringing my SIs, that's all that I need.
Yep.
To be out on the water. And the NOR is like everything beforehand.
Right.
Like, what's going to happen, what's the schedule of events kind of thing. And then once I'm on the water, I get my SI to tell me, what am I doing out there?
So the only other race document you're likely to come across is amendments. And these are often 24, 48 hours before the race. And it's last minute tweaks to those, to the sailing instructions. Sometimes, you know, the race committee will be waiting to get all the registrations in before deciding how to break up the fleet into reasonable groups. So that might come out at the last minute to tell you exactly you're in groups 1, 2, 3, 4. If there's any small tweaks to courses, docking instructions, whatever, it'll be in your amendments. So it's something that when you register for the race, make sure that you are paying attention to that. Usually, you know, as what I do is the morning of the race, as I'm waiting for crew to show up and I'm getting the boat ready, I just quick go online and check again to make sure there's nothing. And by the time, if they issue an amendment within 3 hours of the race start, there's something like really wrong. Usually it'll be the night before kind of thing.
At that point, usually we do, at the race committee, we do not want to issue.
Right. It would be a mess.
Because you're going to have a bunch of drunken sailors in race committee. That's not like drunken sailors.
No.
I would say we could also show too the yacht scoring, which tends to be the online platform that most yacht clubs in Chicago use to kind of put all this information out there to score things to get the registration information. They actually have a nice little thing that if amendments show up, you can see them right away. You can say, oh, there's a new amendment. And if race committee is good, and I usually try to do this, there's a way that I can like send an email to everybody who registers when I post there.
Yeah. Let's make sure, in addition to the perf website, we'll take a look at yacht scoring during the break.
Show you like what yacht scoring kind of looks like. So, but you just want to be mindful. It is also possible, and this will be listed. Usually, I think it's in the NOR, is where things will be posted. We live in the digital age, so yes, most of the stuff is going to be online. But it's also possible they may list a physical place where we will post amendments or sailing instructions or anything like that. So that's also mindful that, especially here, for example, like we do Wednesday night, we don't really set up yacht scoring for Wednesday night racing. We have a little bulletin board downstairs. So if there's any changes or there's results that are posted or whatever it is, we'll post them downstairs there. So that would also be something like, if I want to go check and see,
Oh, I did.
or whatever you need to do, like that's the place you can walk by and be like, you're waiting for crew. You can be like, oh, there's nothing new on there. All right. Or, oh, look, they posted an amendment. And of course, change.
Frequently for really big races, the MAC is this way, the hook is this way, and several others are, that they won't give you the sailing instructions until you show up at the morning of the race, basically, because they use that as a way to force you to turn in your safety checklists and things like that. But those are for really big races where they are particularly concerned about some things that they want to make sure that they physically see everybody. Okay, so we've registered for a race. We've got a handicap. We know when and where to show up. Let's talk through that really scary thing, which is the start sequence. Okay. Okay.
No, I think I thought I put forces first.
Okay. So start sequence. This is something that as a new racer is always, like I said, it can be intimidating. You're lining up and there are 20, 30, 50 other boats around. There's different flags flying. There's, horns being honked. There's a lot going on. And so understanding what's happening is important. And as we noted the casual or rally series that Casra does, it actually simplifies the start sequence, that it has a start window instead of a start time. But this is going to be largely targeted at a more traditional start sequence. So a couple things to make sure we define so that we're talking the same language here, is a boat is considered having started, and this is a change to the racing rules 2 years ago, when her hull has been entirely on the pre-start side of the line, at or after the starting signal, any part of the hull crosses. So the idea is no part of your boat can be on the race course side before start, because a sailboat race start is a moving thing. It's all fluid. And if you're on the other side, we'll talk about what happens then, but you haven't started until typically the bow of your boat. Hopefully you don't go backwards through, crosses the line. And then similarly at the end of the race, your finish is when the first part of your hull crosses the line. So they used to count it as your bowsprit or a sail or something like that hanging out front. And they've revised that to being something a little more rational. Okay, so again, the idea here is to talk you through the day. So before you arrive at the starting area, couple things to think about. The first one is plan on arriving early. You might be the fourth start of the day, but it's not the worst idea to show up before the first start of the day, just to make sure you're there and you have time to get oriented and you're not in a rush. There's nothing worse than showing up to a race in a rush, and especially as a newbie. If you aren't there before the whole race starts and there's other starts that are moving on, just be conscious that some of those people may be in race mode, and you should try to stay out of the way as best as possible. It's not always entirely possible, but generally stay out of the way if you can. And what you're going to be looking for when you show up is the committee boat. There's going to be, usually it's some sort of power boat, sometimes it's a sailboat. They're going to be located, there's going to be all sorts of flags hanging off the thing. They definitely won't have any sails up if it's a sailboat. That's the committee boat. So that's where the people running the race are physically set. And the reason you need to find them is, one, they form part of the start line, but two, when you show up, you need to hail them, let them know that you're there. They typically, race committee gets grumpy and all the rest of the racers get grumpy if you try to register for the race or tell them that you're there over the radio, because there's a lot going on and people are jamming up the radio with, hey, Zella 84044 is here. Everybody else heard that and they don't care, right? So the idea is you're going to pull up, hopefully you're motoring at that point, up towards the back of their boat. You're going to yell at them, hey, this is Zella 84044, checking in. They'll usually acknowledge it in some way, wave, and get the hell out of the way. While you're sailing past the back of the boat, sometimes they'll have a sign with information about the specific course of the day, because the sailing instructions might say, depending on the wind, we're going to go north or south. They'll have information on the back of the boat about that sort of stuff. So not just check in, but also pay attention to any sort of signals they have going on, because that's information for you. Anything else about checking in?
No. You do want to make sure you check it at some point. Race committee, you might try to yell at you to say like, yeah, thank you. Sometimes you'll just get one of these. Just do this and go like that, and that'll be it. It is nice to hail, but if you at least come by and we can see your sail number. It's like, say your main sail is up and your sail number's up. In some races, they have the sail boards and there's a sail number up. If there's something identifying it, we can see your vessel. We appreciate the hail. It's not a requirement necessarily, but we really appreciate it. So as long as you can come by, and all you have to do is like pass by the end of the boat and look to see, there will be one person there who's like sitting there with a clipboard, maybe two people who's doing this, and that's all they're doing. If you can just get their attention and they can acknowledge you and they do this, you're good. You're good. That's all you really need to do. At that point, focus on your race.
Yeah.
So.
And while you're sailing by, again, take a look at what's flags and things like that are up. It'll inform you of where they're at.
And the only other thing is, I would say here, this kind of diagram we're showing here is actually called, this is kind of the starting area, if you will, is shown here. So this one shows the committee boat in blue, and then there's like a little orange or yellow tetrahedron mark. And that's the starting line. And then it shows like the first mark is this orange thing up here. The idea is that whole area is kind of like the starting race area. If you're coming by for a check-in, you want to come by and then get out of that racing area if you're not in sequence.
You literally will cruise down like this, say hi, and give them the number, and then just get out of the way. Because you don't want to be, especially if there's people that are starting already, because you showed up a little late. There's people who are going to be trying to charge through this line. So you want to stay away from that. It's not always entirely possible, but do your
You want
best.
to be courteous. You want to be courteous, and you want to make sure that you get space, and you don't want to loiter there unless you are now in sequence and your section is up.
Yeah.
And you're going for the start. Then it's your line, and everybody else should be out your way.
Yep. So speaking of which, how do you know when it's your turn? Right? There's 100 boats out here. You got this SI thing that's got a whole bunch of goofy flags that say section 1, 2, 3, 4 and times. What those sections are, we should, by definition, is they're breaking down the fleet generally by speed. So they'll take all the one design boats. Of course, one design boats only race against each other, so they'll have their own sections. And then for all the handicap, they're going to take all the fast boats, the Defiance, who's a 66-foot, speed demon out there. He'll be with the other fast boats. And Zella, because we're slow, will be with slow boats. And they sort of group you up sort of reasonably. They try to aim to have groups of, if we can get 10, 12 would be ideal. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But they're really usually more focused, I feel like, on keeping the bandwidth of those handicap ratings as close as possible. Because the handicapping starts breaking down and we have big disparities. So you should be able to, when you look at either the amendment or the sailing instructions, it'll have section breaks, and it might say handicap from 90 to 120 is section 4. And if your handicap is in that section, then now you know you're in section 4. So just look at those amendments, understand what your own rating is, and it'll tell you where to go. And it'll tell you what time your start is. That does not mean that that start time will absolutely be adhered for. And we're going to talk about delays and abandonments and things like that, but there's shit happens, right? So things might get delayed, which is why it's important to look at these flags. So when you're assigned your section, there will also tell you what flag to fly. And this is just off your backstay. And it's their code flags might be a little hard to see on the PowerPoint, but the code flags are associated with numbers. And that number will be your section. So if you're section 3, you're going to have this goofy French flag looking thing flying off the backstay. And that will correspond to flags that race committee is flying on the boat. So if you're in section 3 and you've got the French flag flying off your backstay, and you see that race committee has the French flag up, you should probably pay attention. If it's not that, and you see that they go in order oftentimes, you see that the 4 flag is up, well, that's not your turn yet. You gotta wait, because they usually work their way down.
If they see the 2 flag is up,
then you probably miss your start, because it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as far as sections. Because they want to get the slow boats out of the way first, and then the fast boats. The idea is then on the other end, when people are finishing, you finish closer together, and race committee doesn't have to sit out there as long.
I'd say one kind of side note to that, with the sections, we talk about the curve rating. Also know that there's usually spinnaker sections versus jam sections. So people who might fly a spinnaker while they're racing, and people who may only fly their jam and bank, we call it jam. Be mindful of that as well. You might think like, oh, my perf rating is, I'm a 120, and you look at they have their breakouts, and they got like perf 2 is this, and then later they say jam. Well, if you're not sailing with a spinnaker, you're in the jam section. So also be mindful of what your sections are. And then, like you said, then know what your flag is. And I always recommend know what the flag is in front of you, and maybe the one before that as well, so that you can see what's going to be happening. So you're not like all of a sudden, oh, they got my flag up, right?
And the other way, even if you can't see the flag on the committee boat, if there's boats in sequence, you can usually see all of their backstay flags and get a sense for who's up, right? Because they're all going to be sort of jockeying for position, whereas everybody else will be milling about the back. Yes, go back.
They're only using the flags from the bigger race, right?
Yeah, so like for JPYC for our Wednesday nights, they actually do use flags, believe it or not, because Jan is a stickler for doing things right. But Jan's also really good on Wednesday nights to tell everybody what's up. And we usually just have 2, maybe 3 if we got.
There's really 2. Jackson Park is usually, we have a spinnaker section and a jam section for Wednesday night. So typically they use the J flag for the jam section, and then there is a 1 pin for the spinnaker section. So I did hand these out to, these kind of show what would be the normal starting sequence on a Wednesday night here at Jackson Park. This is what's normal here, typically normal here in Jackson Park on a Wednesday night. This doesn't mean that every other yacht club is doing exactly this, so make sure you be mindful. But yes,
but they all more or less follow the same formula. And if you're new to racing, don't feel like you need to go out and buy it's like $100 for the whole thing with every single code flag on earth. You're get an idea of where you might land. You can make them on your own. Get an old T-shirt and paint a French flag on it.
They're not that expensive. You can go out and buy one flag.
Or you can buy one flag.
As soon as the flag is up on the name, that means go.
No.
Yeah, so that's literally the next slide. So good segue there. So actually it's the next sequence of slides. So overall, there's this sequence that's on the handout George mentioned. It follows a typical pattern everywhere in the world. It's been standardized. And it is a coordination of flag movements as well as sounds that are tied with a countdown. So a race start sequence for keelboats is 5 minutes. And there are different things that happen at 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and then there's a whole lot of nothing for 2 and 3. And then there's some activity at 1, and then go is the countdown. So let's go through that countdown. Oh, the other thing to note is there are horn signals. Some race committees make announcements over the radio of countdowns, and then there's flags flying off of the back of the boat. These are all being run by people, volunteers. Sometimes they don't go perfect. If they go really wrong, then it's a do-over. But if it's just, the precedence is always on the flags, because sometimes your air horn might run out of air. You might not hold down the button far enough on the mic of the radio. The flags, they're either up or they're down. So if all else fails, pay attention to what flags are up or down. They have more information and are more reliable than.
If you got a big enough start line, there can be a sound delay.
Right.
For the horn because it carries across the car.
Yep.
I will say this as race committee. They do tell us this when they train us as race committee. If you miss a sound signal, you miss a sound signal. And this is actually in the racing rules and everything, like usually like that, missing a sound signal is not any way, shape, or form mean that the start is bad. However, we do get ourselves set on the flags and making sure the flags are right, because that is something that everybody can see. And they actually do train us that if we're off on our flag signals, that usually we are trained that we do a postponement and we may reset the sequence. So that's also something you might need to watch out for, is if race committee screws up a flag timing and now we are out of sequence, like we didn't hit the right thing, we may say a postponement, we'll show that later, and then we'll reset.
Yep. And we're going to talk about postponement.
Watch the flags. I would say the most important thing is watch what the flags are doing. The sound is more of a, hey, we did something over here, pay attention and see what we did.
Okay, so 5 minutes. This is really the beginning of the start sequence for your section. It should be noted that if there are multiple sections, which oftentimes there are, the 0 for the previous is your 5. Some races will have a break in between, but oftentimes they're just trying to get everybody out of the way as quick as possible, and it's 0, and that flag goes down and your flag goes up, and it's all at the same time. The sounds are the same, and they're just flipping which flags are up. Again, paying attention to flags is key here. So don't be surprised if there's no lag. If you're sitting there waiting for them to announce your section, they might not be announcing it. They might just be rolling on in. So what the flags are doing in this sequence is the current section goes up. So if we keep talking about section 3, the French flag, you're going to see that flag go up at 5 minutes. They will also blast a short blast of the horn, usually, I don't know, secondish, maybe a little under. A short blast of an air horn. They might not say something in the radio, but usually you're going to see a flag and a horn are going to go up letting you know there's 5 minutes. And at that point, everybody in that section is going to start congregating around the start line. And what you need to be doing is really just thinking about where the line is, how that relates to the wind direction, wind speed, where you are in relation to all of this and the competitors, and start formulating a plan in your head for how you're going to take on the next 5 minutes, with the goal being at 1, theoretically, if you do a perfect start at 0, you are full speed going on your preferred heading and crossing the line all precisely at 0. That's a perfect start. For reference, there were some professional races going on last weekend that I was watching on TV. Sometimes they're 5-10 seconds behind because it's so stinking hard. to get it absolutely perfect, but that's the goal. So you formulate in your head, how am I going to get in 5 minutes across that line in good shape and not before.
I would say the side one, as me as a racer, this is the part where you're now looking at the wind speed and you might like go away from the line and see like how fast is that, and when I come back, how long does it take me to get here? So I start judging distance in my speed and see like if I'm out here, how long will it take me to get back there, so that I can mentally say, well, if I go over there, it's 30 seconds for me to get to the line. So I know that now I have to jockey my boat so that 30 seconds to the start, I want to be at that point starting to face myself. Right?
You're just working out sort of a plan.
Again, I think mostly is, yes, you want to be there at zero. Ideally, actually, what you're really aiming for is just want to be in front of your competition. If they're behind you and you were both kind of late to start, who cares?
And candidly, as new racers, if you're 20 seconds late to the start,
It's not.
I mean, right? Yeah, technically you've got, I think it's 5 minutes. It'll say in the race rules, sometimes it's more, but yeah,
Yes,
you've got a window.
in most cases, I'll be honest, unless I would say on a Wednesday night, unless you're like, you didn't check in and you're egregiously late, they'll just. I mean, the race committee, like racers, like we just want people out on the course, So it's not like, oh, you're 2 seconds behind the thing, I'm gonna DNS you. Like, no, just go. If it's a weekend race and it's a really crowded fleet, they might, just because they're like, we want to keep people on schedule because we have a lot of traffic.
Right.
But it's usually, it's a wide window. I mean, you usually have plenty of time to kind of get your boat out there.
Yeah.
We've seen ones where like, someone was like way over early and they had to come back. And they were like, I think they were like at least 7 minutes late to the start. And we said, it was like a small
starting in another section.
Yep.
They did not pay attention to the signals and they thought it was time to go at the warning signal, and they went, and we were just like, where are they going? And then I think Jan made sure she broadcast over the video when it was start, this is the start, that when we did the start of that really loud, and then you saw them go crack off, come back. I'm sure there was a lot of
Yeah.
We thought we were winning this race. No, you're not winning the race.
And you should have that flag on your backstay. So even though it might look like you're crossing early, right? They'll see that the flag was the previous section and you're free to go. Okay.
Is that blue flag? Is that the front?
Yeah. So at 4 minutes, the prep flag goes up. It's a P flag. It's a blue flag with the white square in the middle. So that when that flag goes up, it means we have 4 minutes to the start. There's also a couple of other technical things that matter here. This is when the right of way rules go into effect. You have to have your motor off at this point. So if it's 5 minutes, you don't need the motor off technically. You probably just should anyways because we're in sailboats. But by 4, motor off. We're sailing. The rules are in effect. Is one of the important parts here. In addition to just timing things, and as we said with the 5 minute time, your whole plan that you made at 5 minutes is probably out the window, and you're formulating a new plan or modifying it because other boats have moved around. There might have been a wind shift. You're not quite as fast as you thought you were. Again, you're modifying that plan, adjusting for the conditions, again, with the goal being to cross the start line in a seaman-like manner, I guess we could say. So now, as we mentioned, there's nothing at 3, there's nothing at 2. So you're just sort of sailing about for a couple minutes, again, jockeying for position, making sure you're where and when you want to be. At 1, you are going to get a long horn sound, and that prep flag comes down. Your section stays up, but the blue and white prep flag will come down. So if you see only one flag up for your section, it's either you're either just under 5 minutes or you're under 1 minute. And hopefully you've been hearing some other horns and looking at other flags to understand what's going on. So it's just going to be your section flag up. You have 1 minute to go. And really, this is when you start making your approach. You should be relatively where you want to be, point the boat at the line and start going, unless you're right on the line. And then you probably want to think about exactly how you're going to bleed some time. So that's really what's going on at 1 minute. It's the final preparations across. And then, of course, at 0, your section flag goes down next flag might go up, and there's going to be a horn sound and have fun racing. Again, goal is hit the line as close to 0 as you can, going as fast as you can, and hopefully the right way. But what happens? Any questions before we go on to what happens if that goes wrong? Makes sense? 5, 2, 4, 2, 1.
I was gonna say one thing. If you a timer, we all, I don't know, but we all have, like, I have a watch that has a second I can do it. So I set it, and then I usually watch to see when I'm going to get the signals, am I on sync? And one of the other reasons is on weekend racing, we also pay attention to what are the sections ahead, because what we might do is set our timer 15 minutes. Right? And now I have that clock watching. So we are not like, when are they going to throw our flag up? We could be like, oh, they're about 3 seconds away from putting up our flag, because race committee is going to be on time. We want to be down to the second. And if you have a good watch, they often will have a sync thing so that you can sync it on the signal. Like I'm off by 3 seconds, and I can get it lined up. But I don't know if that's necessarily important. But you will find having a watch or a timer is a big difference, because then a lot of those signals in between, you can kind of loosely pay attention to it, but you can see on your watch, like, no, we're 20 seconds from the start. We're 15 seconds from the start. You know.
And depending on your boat, if you have, I mean, instruments that are within the last 20 years, there's probably a countdown timer on there somewhere if you poke enough buttons, because it's just frequently used. No, that's a great point. Having some sort of watch is huge. Okay, so what happens if that all goes wrong? You know, everybody, we always say you want to be as close to 0 as possible, but what if you screwed it up and you're a little early? It's going to be what we call a recall. And that falls into 2 categories. The simplest one is the individual recall. So this is 1, maybe 2, 3 boats were over early. And race committee is going to sound a horn and put up the individual recall flag. That's this blue cross on a white field. They're going to throw that up really quick and probably jump on the radio and say, sail number 1, 2, 3, 4 and sail number 5, 6, 7, you guys are over early. And they will call you, tell you who it was. Usually you already know it yourself. If you think you're over early, you kind of do it. And you're probably paying attention anyways to see if that flag went up. So if you're at all curious, look over, make sure that flag didn't go up. If it didn't, keep on going, because they put it up fast. Usually it's the same, they have one person switching the section flags and another person on the recall flag, ready to go with it. Especially in big fleets.
We can usually tell. Too. Obviously, we see boats up and we're like, get the X flag ready. That's the X flag. Get the X flag ready. Yeah, that one. I will say this much as race committee: we are not required to hail a boat under RRS that is recalled. True. The only thing we are required to do is display the X flag and make a sound. That is the only thing we're required to do. If you go off and we hail you, we try to hail you, you don't receive the hail. That is your problem, not our problem. So the only thing in the RS that we are required to do is put that X flag up, make a sound. That's it. I will say the other thing is they go here, we are required to fly it until all boats that have been recalled have cleared the line. By clearing the line means you basically come all the way on the non-course side. Once you're clear of that, now you're clear and you can make your start. Yeah. So once all your equipment is on, or your hull or whatever is all the way across the other side, you can now make your start. If there's more than one boat, we will try to be courteous and be like, sail number 5, 2, 8, 3, and we might say that. We may not. We might be busy with other stuff. And so you also have to kind of know where you are in that position if you see you're clear. And if there's another boat that's recalled to, it might be more confusing if they're behind you, right? And they're still clearing, where you don't see the flag go down. You could be like, are we clear? I don't know, because we have to keep that up until all boats that have recalled have been clear.
And to get the idea of getting clear is you were on the wrong side, even if that is just the tip of your bow is on the wrong side of the line, you need to get the entirety of your boat on the free start side of the line and back. So sometimes that means you got to sail along and then turn around and come back because you were way over. Other times, if you have room for it, you might be able to just sort of like duck back a little bit and go. But it's important to keep in mind, if you are under penalty, which is this is the case, you have zero right-of-way rights. So if you're in the middle of a really dense fleet, you can't just turn around without hitting someone. You have no rights to push them out of your way. You got to figure out how to get out of that.
And even if you would be like, we'll talk about this later, starboard port situation, doesn't apply. If you're a recalled boat and the other boat's racing, you have absolutely no rights. You got to clear everyone, regardless of what board they're on, when we're moored, all that stuff doesn't apply. So you got to usually, we've all been over early, so don't feel shame to do. But you just kind of like, all right, we'll get around everyone.
Yeah, slow down, figure it out. The other, yes.
Is that the latest, the next section to go?
Nope. They keep going.
They keep going. And go ahead.
Oh, so that state individual recall, that section, you got 3 votes, 2 of them complied, the other one didn't. And it's still racing.
Yep.
You're gonna take you're gonna take.
They're gonna get it. They're going to be
We
disqualified.
will, yeah, so yeah, what we will do is on that particular case, so let's say you had 10 boats, 3 boats are over early. Well, those other 7 boats are off to the course. Nothing went wrong with them. Those other 3 boats, let's say, like you said, 2 of them came back and cleared. The last one did not thought, oh no, I was fine. They just kept going. We will mark them what's called OCS, on course side, which basically means you didn't race for that particular race. You get a penalty for that race because you didn't start right.
Yep.
The other ones will, once they clear, they're off racing, and there is no penalty at that point.
You burned off.
At least under normal starts. I'll put a preface on that. There are some weird ones that you might lean in the back. There's some weird penalties that might be a mistake. Most cases, we don't apply those penalties. So, like, it's the fact that you have to come back and leave. Like, that's the penalty. That's your penalty. You got to turn around and come back. Go ahead.
But you have to go out around.
Not necessarily.
You should need to get the entire boat behind the line.
Under most circumstances, you just have to get the boat clear of that. Can you go back to the start?
But if you leave early, then.
Not this
presumably
one.
You got boats behind you that.
Yeah.
And they've got the right of way, you don't.
Yeah, it's fun.
Go to one where it's time 0. We'll show it. It's a little bit easier to see here.
All right. It's hard to.
Especially when I stand away.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get that thing. You might be able to see, like, way over here, there's another boat. This is actually such a big race. They actually have another boat as the other end of the mark. So from there to this guy here, that's the line. That's the imaginary line. If, let's say, this boat here was over early, all they have to do is get all their equipment on that side, and then they can go.
And if that means go around the end, fine. If it means come back through where you came through, fine. Just get on the other end. There people have talked, I think in the past, there used to be the sort of string rule where you need to unconnect and reconnect the dots, but that's
Not
one
for
of
the
those.
start. That's for other things. Under most circumstances, you just have to get clear. I will, though, preface it, there are some special starting rules that may be applied, but they are very infrequently applied, where things like that do come into play. Where there might be a specific thing that if you are recalled, you now have to do this, or now you have to do this. However, those are like, at least racing out here, the only time we apply it is one design fleet. They can be very aggressive and can make starting complicated for the race committee. And sometimes we have to do, and that kind of makes a good segue into this, a general recall. A general recall is if either there's an error or we can't figure out who's over early, but we know boats were over early. So at this point, like we can't have a if all but one boat is over early, actually you can individual recall the rest of the fleet, and it's like that guy can go because he did it right. The general recall basically means go back and start again, which means then we fly that. The first substitute flag, which is this triangle, we'll fly that. All the boats have to come clear. 1 minute after we put that up, we start the sequence over again. Yeah. Race committee doesn't like to do that. So, like, for example, I remember we would have this one really aggressive one design fleet. They did this. We had a general recall because they all just piled up on the line and we couldn't see anything. And the guy whose race committee says, we're going to give them this penalty for the thing, which the one penalty was, which is in the racing rules, is if you're over early, even a minute before the start, you have to do that end around thing. And boy, when they saw that flag go up, they all backed off. Like, no, I think the first boat started like, 15 seconds after the flag went down. They all like, okay, we're back off. But those do exist. They're very infrequent. Here, usually it's just like, just get yourself there and go off the race. Any other?
Yeah, then everybody gets pushed back.
Everybody gets pushed back like 6 minutes.
Yep.
You got a minute for the general recall, and then you start the 5 minutes. Yeah.
Which
That's
is why
why we're like-
those start times that get published in the SIs can get screwed up really quick, right? If there is a recall in a previous section, it might say that you're starting at 11:05, but now it's 11:11.
There's some examples here you can look at them. These are defined, so yeah, like the one we talked about is the I flag, and it's like, yeah, when they see that come up, they're like, all right, we'll behave, because right, we don't want to be there out there all day and have like people waiting for like, we want to start.
Yep.
Anyway,
So other things that might happen if the start of the race wasn't perfect, or that you might run into when you show up, all more or less have to do with delays. So the first one I always call cat and hat, is this candy cane stripe flag that race committee flies. If they have that up, that means we're under postponement. That could mean for any number of reasons. It might mean having to reset the course because a buoy blew away or something like that. It could mean we showed up late and we're just not quite ready for the first start. So if you see the cat and hat up means postponement, stay in the area and pay attention, because race committee will make some announcements, will probably make some noises about what to expect and when things are going to get going again. And again, this is a reason why your 11:05 start might get pushed back, is because there's postponement. When it goes up, it's 2 blasts of a horn. When it comes down, it's 1 blast of a horn. Again, race committee is just trying to get your attention. There's also abandonment. So this is during a race. If a race has already started, if there's a reason that race needs to be stopped, is you'll see this blue checker flag go up. It's the end flag. Usually there will be a postponement flag as well, and things are kind of a mess when that goes up. It was actually the Sail GP last weekend. They had a whale going through the middle of the course, and they had to postpone for like half an hour while they waited for the whale to get out of the way. It happens. It was kind of funny to watch that. Unfortunately, they didn't get a good shot of the whale. You think with all the helicopters, they show us the damn whale. But anyways, and so abandonment flag is 3 blasts when it goes up, and then you'll get more announcements of what's going on at that point. Don't see a lot of abandonment flags. Buoy racing, you might see them more often, especially if a mark blows loose or something like that. They might throw an abandonment flag up. Wind dies, they might abandon.
We've done that.
Yep. The other one you might see more commonly, especially in buoy racing, are the C and S flags. This means we're changing the course. So again, if the wind dies down and you were supposed to be sailing 1 mile legs and you're going to sail 4 of them, but the wind died, they might say, okay, we're only doing 2 legs now. So it's telling you that in some way the course has changed. Race committee will usually have some more information available as to exactly what that means, or it'll be in your SIs. Your sailing instructions might say the short course is this. So if you see that flag go up, start looking for what the short course means.
I will say this one, the C flag, which is this white and red there, the change flag, that will be if the next mark, the next place you got to go to has changed. That will typically be displayed at the mark just prior to that. So if this is a buoy race and you're going up and down and up, let's say, and let's say that up mark, they decided they wanted to change it when you were coming back down. At that one, just prior to that, they will go, we're changing where you're going next. So the change happens at a mark that you should already know about. And now they're telling you, you now have a new place to go that we didn't tell you about before. And they will usually give you, we try to give you a bearing. So they'll have like a little white dry erase board probably, and a big, bearing to the next mark will be listed on there. And then you'll have to go look for it. Excuse me. And there might be some instructions on, sometimes on buoy racing on the weekends, we might change the color too. So normally like our marks are orange, but if we do a change mark, we make it yellow so that it's like really apparent to everybody, like where you're going. So that you're not looking out, there's a bunch of orange blips out there. Which one do I go to? You're like, oh no, there's that yellow one. That's the one. So That's what the C is. The S or the shorten is to that point. And so that will usually be displayed on the race committee boat if they're saying, this is now the new finish line. So if they did, for example, we have flags and we said, you know what, we're shortening it to 2. The race committee boat will have an S flag displayed, and they are now the finish line at them. So the change is going to be like, here's where you're going next, and the shorten is 2. When you see the S flag, that's where the finish line is. They're not saying the next one's going to be shortened. They're saying this is the finish. Question?
And that's a lot to throw at you, yeah.
I know.
But and the other, oftentimes, especially if you're new, you're probably not in front of the fleet, understand what you're racing against, and they're probably doing the right thing. If you're really in doubt, that's not the worst way to be a newbie out there. Is follow the leader. I think we've all done it. And then the last one is the yellow and black checker flag. You'll see this before a race. It just means come to me. Usually the race committee wants you to check in, or they've got information about the next course, or some sort of information on a whiteboard on the back of the boat they want you to come near to show you. Okay, questions on the start sequence and flags and all that fun stuff before we start talking about race courses? Is that a question? No? Okay, good. Okay, race course basics. Here we go. So generally,
I think there's some messages in the chat.
oh, where the messages in the chat? There it is. Hi, Luke, George. Hello. Anyone have? Oh, someone's leaving. Great. Thanks, Philippe.
I don't have a touch screen. I'm not sure what the orange triangle represents. Oh, we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about the orange triangle in a minute.
And then maybe if you want to go up there and see if you can just hide the bar. So we can see the tab.
This.
Go to more. And then hide floating meeting control. Got it.
There we go. Okie dokie. Okay, so types of courses. Generally, racing breaks down into 2 buckets, if you will. The first one, and probably what most new racers are going to get into, is a distance race, or sometimes it's referred to random legs, sometimes it's called port to port. The idea is it's going to be on that day a single race of several miles. It might be 8 miles, it might be 20 miles, it might be 300 miles, right? You're going around a distance, and it's the sail angles might not be just upwind, downwind. It's going to be whatever nature gives you, especially because the course might last 3 hours for you to sail this course. Generally, again, they're pretty straightforward. Oftentimes they'll use government marks, go around the cribs, go around this buoy here, things like that. The sort of more, I guess, technical, you could call it racing, is buoy racing. That is, there's a half dozen or so different orientations of the race course. The most common is windward leeward, where you sail upwind and then back downwind. But there's triangles, there's pick a geometric shape, and there's probably a race course for it that they can do. And it's what race committee will set up is buoys in that specific pattern, and you will go around them in a certain sequence, set number of times, and that'll define your race course. And the idea with buoy racing is typically, you're racing only a couple miles at a time, and you will get multiple races in a day. It's not uncommon to have 5 races if you're doing buoy races in an afternoon. And between each race, they reset the sequence. So you're going to do your whole sequence for the start, run your race, wait for everybody to finish, and then set up and go again. So the layout of the start finish line. So obviously the first part of a race line, the race course, is the start finish line. More or less, it's going to be set up like this. So you're always going to have some sort of signal boat, race committee boat. Again, it's typically a power boat. Sometimes it's a sailboat that's anchored somewhere out wherever it is in your SIs that says. Your sailing instructions will usually give you a lat long, and there's going to be a boat anchored there. They try to always orient the start line perpendicular to the first course the first mark of the course. So if it's a windward leeward race, they are just facing directly upwind. If it's a distance race, the first mark of the course might be downwind, which always makes for an interesting start. But it's always going to be perpendicular to the course. And to define that line, they set up a series of buoys. So for the start line, they're going to set up a buoy across from an orange flag. Typically, the buoy is off on the sides of the port, is where the start line is. It's port side of the committee boat. Again, between an orange flag of the committee boat and some sort of buoy. Orange is nice, but it's not always necessarily that. The finish line can be a whole lot of different things, but if it's going to be off of the race committee boat, it's going to be off on the other side. It'll be on starboard side with the blue flag and another mark. For distance races, sometimes you won't even see the start line anymore because they'll pick that up as they wait for you to come around to the finish. And theoretically, the finish on the distance race should also be oriented, or any race should be oriented perpendicular to the last mark of the course. So again, it's presented to you. There's times, especially in really long races, where the wind direction changes or something like that, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to get around it, but usually it's oriented at whatever your last mark was. Just for those of you racing here in Jackson Park Yacht Club, we set up our start line backwards because we use the end of Casino Pier instead of a buoy. So the start line is always backwards, but that's relevant for the half the room that does JPYC races. And again, it's usually pretty straightforward. You're going to have a boat and a buoy. Go between.
And the line is the flag on the boat to the buoy.
And you'll see, actually, if they're doing it properly, there will be someone on race committee standing directly behind that flag with their eye lined up to the buoy so that they can call out who's over early. And they are standing specifically right there, sometimes in an awkward position, to make sure that they're looking down the line properly.
I would say one note about, and Luke does say that the Wednesday night here in Jackson is backward, but that is denoted in the sailing instructions. So that's also something to be mindful of. This is generally what you will see, but there is a section that says the start in your sailing instructions that will say that it is changed.
And the other thing to note for distance races, the finish line might not be in the same location as the start. This is very obvious in things like the MAC, where the start is here and the finish is in Mac Island. But it also happens on just a Saturday afternoon race where we start in town and finish in Jackson Park or something like that. So again, read your SIs, it'll tell you what to expect out there. So we keep talking about marks. What are they? In most cases, it's some sort of inflatable buoy, usually pretty big. I mean, the size of a chair or bigger, frankly, and they come in whole different shapes and colors. The shape and color will be described in your sailing instructions. So you have tetrahedrons, which are big triangles. You've got teardrops. The name is pretty straightforward. All these names are fairly obvious here, right? Tomatoes, even if they're not red, they're just big balls. Cylinders. The new one that you might see up there, especially if you're up at Corinthian Yacht Club, is Markset bots. They're little drones that are over here. But again, pretty obvious, bright orange thing floating on the water. That's a mark. We also use these more for distance racing, are fixed marks. So these might be government buoys, lighted buoys, things like that. We're going to talk about it in a bit when we talk about sort of local knowledge and what's around Chicago, but there are fixed racing marks that are set up out there in a couple circles. You might have sailed past little candy canes off of like Burnham Harbor, for example. Those are fixed marks. And then the most obvious ones are things like cribs. So the 68th Street crib, then 4 Mile, then Deaver, then Wilson are the fixed government marks. One note, if you go around the cribs, stay outside the guard marks, the little white buoys. Otherwise, I don't know what happens, but I think Homeland Security gets angry. Yeah.
Well, actually, though, in Chicago, when we use the crib, the guard marks are part of that. So it's actually not sailing the course if you go inside the guard marks. So if you go inside the guard marks, you didn't sail the course because all those little guard marks are part of that thing you have to go around. And we specifically put that in there because of, yes, it's like, that's a space you're not supposed to be going. And we specifically delineated that size of like, the guard marks count as part of that crib, which means you have to go around everything. Yes.
If it's not mentioned in SI, outside your farm, they don't go inside.
No, it's not.
It's I mean, it's government
Because I've
illegal.
seen that.
Yeah, people do lots of things.
But I mean, for the purposes of if you're, selling this human like manner, you don't go in there because it's restricted water anyways. There's
The
no
boats
reason
that
it
you
should
see
ever be in
people
there.
go in there, do they have a mask or not?
So what does a rounding a mark mean? So marks we use as a turning point, right? Your sailing instructions will tell you how to round them. It'll say take marks to port, this to starboard. And the idea is you leave the mark on that side. So if it says take marks to port, you're going to turn left. If it says take marks to starboard, turn right. Sometimes on distance races, because they're trying to make sure that they're separating out traffic properly, all the marks might not necessarily be port. This one might be port, and that one might be starboard to make sure people don't hit each other coming around it. If it doesn't say anything, the default is you round to port. So again, default is port, otherwise do what they say, port or starboard, left, right. Again, stay outside the guard marks or cribs. Buoy racing has some specific things going on because how they set up the courses. Again, it's traffic control and just making sure the course is laid out properly. The first one, just terminology wise, is your windward mark. When you're doing a windward leeward race, the windward mark is the one closest to windward, furthest upwind, right? Sailors aren't smart, so we make things obvious. The leeward mark is going to be the most leeward one. It is worth noting that frequently sometimes the committee is the leeward mark, but oftentimes you might see something set up like this where they have something else because committee doesn't want you rounding them, or it's a way to shorten the course. So there might be some other marks halfway down the course. That's the leeward mark.
I was gonna say, usually if we're setting up a buoy race committee, we put out a leeward mark that's actually upwind of the race committee building. Because we want people racing up there and not coming around that until they're finished.
Yeah.
We'll see that. But that will again all be in your SIs.
Yep. And then there's sometimes, and especially it happens on those leeward marks, it's referred to as a gate. So it's this setup here where it'll be two buoys. What do I go port or starboard? There's two of them. The answer is you go in the middle, you can turn port or starboard. It's up to you, whichever one makes more sense because of traffic, next point of sail, whatever. So if you see this orientation, again, usually it's on a leeward mark. You can go either way, is allowed. At a windward gate, oftentimes you will see an offset mark. So it'll be a mark and then a ways off, sort of perpendicular to the course, will be another buoy that's largely used for traffic separation. Because if you can imagine all the boats are screaming around here, right? They turn in and they've got a whole bunch of boats right in their face. So they'll do an offset mark. So you will come up around this, head on over around the offset, and then make your jibe. Sometimes it's referred to as a jibe mark for that reason. It's traffic separation. Does that make sense? Again, windward, stay outside everything. It's a gate. Choose your own destiny.
The trick is go through the middle though.
Through the middle.
It's a gate. So go
Yeah.
through the gate and then
But it's important to understand the difference when there is an offset mark, because this can look like a gate at the windward side. So again, read your sailing instructions because it will tell you if it's an offset or if it's a gate at windward. It'd be a little weird, but probably not unheard of. Yep, just get around it.
what side you're coming from? Maybe you're coming from the left side of the course.
Yep.
So you aim from the left side of the gate and kind of just scoot around the side.
Yep.
Or maybe you decide to actually split. I've seen people do this. It's crazy, but if you got like such a hot angle, you go through the gate. You have to make your decision. Granted, you also have to keep in mind of what is traffic, what are rights, who has rights over you, do you have rights over someone, what's going on. There's usually a lot of pandemonium that might be happening because maybe you're going down upwind. But Yeah, so the gate is kind of like a choose your own adventure. But the only thing is you have to go through it. I see people do this, they like go on the outside and come through the middle. Then end around, and it doesn't matter which area you put it around.
Yeah, it's through the middle first. Questions on rounding marks, gates?
There's a little note there. You might see guard marks outside the mini boat.
Mhm.
Don't go between those. That's usually, often sometimes they might throw a guard mark out where their anchor is. The idea is I have this anchor line going like this. And I just put the guard mark up in front of you to say like, there's my anchor line. Don't go between me and the guard marks that you get fouled in the anchor line.
It's usually pretty funny if it's Columbia that's running the race. It'll be a little inflated Nemo fish floating out is what they use as their guard mark. But yeah, there's something and it's race committee trying to make sure that they don't get hit.
Space, we have stuff out here. And then sometimes it's also not just you don't want to get hit. It's like, we have something here. Don't hit yourself.
Right. We don't want to mess.
Generally speaking, of the offset mark, how far, I mean, this is a general rule, is it 100 yards away from the mark?
It really, no, 100 yards would be a lot. Usually it's 100 feet would be, yeah. It's enough just to make sure that, again, someone's not swinging around and going to tack right back through traffic.
Drive right around.
Right.
Everybody's right there trying to get around that part.
Right, causing just pandemonium for rules. But yeah, it's never like 300 feet would be really far.
Yeah. I
Couple
would say
boat lengths.
probably like 2-3 boat lengths maybe.
Yeah.
Usually just enough that you're gonna come around and you're gonna see, I got that other thing to go and I'm just getting again. And
You're gonna-
actually usually what it is, we'll talk about it later, there's this like free boat length circle that exists where there's like special rules. Usually the offset is just outside of it. Because then the idea is you get everybody's going around the mark to get way outside that circle so that they're not in the pandemonium that's happening as people are coming to them. Now push them outside of the circle. So if you got a 30-foot boat, that it's probably about.
The other thing we didn't mention, but just you mentioned size of things. The start line is usually 1.25 to 1.5 times the overall width of all the boats competing length. So if you took all the boats in a section, the biggest section, end to end, add 1.25 to 1.5, and that's the length of the line. So you know they're not going to change it for every section, but they're going to set it for the biggest one to make sure everybody has enough room. Because again, with those, if someone's over early, you need a little bit of room to have half a chance at figuring things out.
The only addendum I would have to that would be listed in your sailing instructions is if there is maybe a race, and I've seen this happen on some really big races where there's huge disparity. Maybe they got like a huge one design section that's like well more than what we would ever have for a first section. They might set 2 line marks out there, and they might say for this section you go to the green mark, which is further out is your line, and then everybody else is the white mark. So if you see 2 others, like read your size, but it will be clearly delineated what that's going on. It should be in your size.
Questions about race course setup marks? Good. Okay. Just a little bit of knowledge so that when you guys are out there racing, because presumably you're going to be racing somewhere along the Chicago shore, you know what to more or less look for. So we're on the south side right now, so we're going to start there. Generally, if you're doing beer can racing here at Jackson Park, we do it right out off the end of Casino Pier. So the Casino Pier forms one end of the line, there will be race committee forming the other. Jan will announce, or George will announce what the course is. Typically, it's around the crib. We might be using Clemson Shoal buoy. Once in a long while, there's a buoy, I think it's the number 6 buoy that's down by the water treatment plant. And that's our Wednesday night sort of options. Usually we keep 3-5 miles, depending on the wind situation. Other things that are here on the south side, even if you're not a Jackson Park sailor, just to be cognizant of. So we have 68th Street crib. It's pretty straightforward what that is. It's all just like any of the other intake cribs. It's an active crib. It's referred to as Clemson Shoal. So there's a series of 3 buoys out here. The one we use commonly for racing is the number 4 bell buoy. It's the only one that has a bell on it and the light. Castra also commonly distance races. If they don't want to like push people all the way down to the crib down here, they might make you turn around the Clemson Shoal buoy. The other buoys are unlighted and frequently not used. They mark shallow-ish spots. Most of us, if we're not sailing on Defiance, won't have an issue with the depth there. There is one spot to be aware of, though. It's in here. So Morgan Shoal is home to Chicago's only shipwreck, and there's a reason. So if you're cruising along near shore, pay attention for this buoy here on Morgan Shoal, because it does get into the small single digits of water depth over there. Usually not a problem as long as you're outside Promontory Pier, and if you're going downtown or Promontory Point, you're clear of it, but just something to be aware of. Sure, you don't want to get in there. Anything else that we're hazardous down here? We're pretty straightforward. Your charts are probably wrong. We have a break wall now. That's not on everybody's chart anymore. Okay, downtown, which is where most hazard races are going to be held. Really three main things going on down there. The first is the SA7 racing circle. I mentioned earlier, there's a fixed set of marks. The SA7 marks are red and white candy canes, or like pieces of PVC, maybe 6-8 inches in diameter. They stick up like 5 feet out of the water. They're actually set up in this circle with one in the middle. The idea being they use it, I believe, Wednesday nights out there. For the downtown clubs use it. With this circle, you can create pretty much any sort of buoy pattern you want. You can get darn near windward in any direction depending on how you use them. It's actually pretty convenient that they have it set up there. Morph also extensively uses it on weekends. You also have the SA4 racing area. People don't refer to SA4 too much anymore, but usually this is where Casbah does their race starts, especially for distance races. It's just outside Monroe Harbor, far enough out that you're out of the way of cruise boats and things like that. Most power boats won't go that far out. So this is SA4. This is probably the most commonly used start in the city. And then the other ones that you're probably already aware of, you've got the Deaver crib and the 4 Mile crib. Deaver being the candy cane one, 4 Mile being the one with all the bird crab on it. It's really fun to go around that on the leeward side. Yeah, there's the 2 cribs, candy cane, bird crab. Okay, north side. So Chicago also has their own little racing circle right off of Montrose Harbor. They'll use that oftentimes for race starts and stuff on weekends. Obviously, if you're racing up there, that's their Wednesday night circle. I think Chicago Belmont uses it too. Wednesday nights, I believe they team up. But anyways, there's a racing circle. And then Corinthian also has set a number of other marks at further distances that they use for distance races. Corinthian's marks are white sticks. Again, a piece of PVC, 6-8 inches, sticks up like 5 feet. They're kind of hard to see, but there's a whole bunch of them out there in a distinct pattern. All of this, when you look at your SIs, will have a map that shows you lat long for all of these, and probably will have a course diagram drawn out on it showing you exactly which one of these to use for any of the marks in the city. Again, your SIs should be pretty detailed with that information, and certainly in an amendment that comes out, we'll tell you exactly where you're going. And then you have Wilson crib, which is the only inactive one. It's pretty hard to miss, giant brick structure out there. And the only other thing, just generally speaking, is some pierheads that stick out relatively far. So if you're cruising along the shoreline on the north side, just be aware that some of those pierheads stick out further than you'd like to think before you make the news. Questions on sort of goofy things you've seen in the water? No? Okay. Well, I think we're going to take a little break. Feel free to grab some snacks, ask us questions. We check the chat. Get them checked out.
And click on this. Click on this to make it accurate. Now go up, down. Now go.
There it goes. Escape. No, everybody's good. Okay. Oh, you want to bring up, yeah, Morph and that's for me. So I guess I will.
Why did you race those nights?
No, I probably could. I know they have to help. But I got invited to race on the F1 events this year, so yeah.
Oh, wow.
Pretty excited.
Yeah, I do the racing. Sailboat. You have a boat? Yeah. I was at Pearson. So, over here. During COVID, I had a benefit meeting. Yeah. It's steep learning
All right, everybody who's online, we're gonna get started again. There's a few things that we're just gonna show before we jump back into the presentation. Number one, this is the MW Perf, Midwest Perf, which used to be LM Perf website, where you would get your ratings. If you don't have, you're brand new, you don't have a login, which you might be, they have it right down here. If you wish to apply for a new certificate, please contact us via email and we'll give you a login ID. And they're pretty responsive about it. So that's all you would need to do is send them an email. Once you would have a login, you can then fill out the information on the form. You could go into here and say, obtain a new handicap, apply for a new or renew an update certificate. And so you could go in here and say, well, I'm new. I don't know if it's going to, yeah, it's going to tell me I got to log in. There's a whole series of forms you go through that you like start with your basic boat identifying information. What's the make? What's the model? What's my sail number? What's the boat name? Who am I? What's my mailing address? All that fun stuff. And then you start to get into things of like, what's the length overall? What's the beam of the boat? There's these other measurements that you run into. Sailboat data is a really good resource. I'm going to show that really quick, but if I go sailboatdata.com, you can go in here. Come on. Maybe. Still on the internet, right? There you go, sailboat data. You could go down here, search. Who's got a new boat? Give me a boat. Catalina 30. Catalina 30. Search. And scroll down. Catalina 30. Here we go. We got a couple different ones. That seem about right?
No.
Oh, that's a Caprice. Sorry, there's the Catalina 30. Yeah. Catalina 30, the base model, 1976 range. Do you know what year your boat was? 85. Okay, so you're probably, no, then you would be that first one, the original, because 86 was the Mark II. All right, you go down here, Catalina 30. Oh, your length overall is 29.92 feet. There's your length of your water line if they want it. Oh, there's the picture. Coming out here. The beam, the displacement, how much ballast you have. You come down here, there's these rig dimensions, and they will ask for you, what's the I, what's the P, what's the J? These are like variables that the sail makers, and they've all decided that like this particular measurement on the boat is called the I or the P or the J. You don't necessarily need, you could go and figure out what those are and actually end up a perfect diagram or show you which each one of these are. But if you got a stock regular kind of setup, you could just go, oh, my I is 41 feet. Here's my P. And this is how you can fill in that information. Okay. If you were curious, it'd be like search, or no, excuse me, display a handicap. Make model. Catalina 30. Oh, Catalina 30. Let's see. There's a bunch of Catalina 30s that are registered. TMs mean tall mass, SP, but you could see base handicap somewhere in the range of, you can see most of these look like there's 168. Some of these have 189s from different boats and stuff like that. I could actually view the certificate if I wanted to, and it would be like, here's this particular Get Kraken for David and Robin Olson. They have a Catalina 30 tall mast built in 1983. Here's all their numbers. Here are their handicaps that were assigned. Right. You would get this certificate too. They would send you this. It's all digital. Like if I went in and here, we're gonna we're gonna embarrass Luke. Zella. Yeah, I did. All right, Zella. You have renewed your certificate. He's a good boy. There you go. He's got a renew. Yes. So Zella, here's Luke's certificate, right? Here's his sale number. He's 84044. Here's his whole number, for example. He's at CNC 35 Mark III, built in 1985, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a number of handicap numbers that will be there. Just a quick note, there's usually these three numbers. HCP, or sometimes called the BHCP, the base handicap. The DHCP, which is the handicap if you're doing distance racing, there's some kind of this thing. And then the NSHCP, which is the non-spinnaker handicap. I would look to see that in your SIs, they might say, hey, you go to yacht scoring, what's my handicap? Look in the SIs and see which one of those acronyms they say they're going to use. And then that acronym, you throw the number in there. Give it your best shot. I'll be honest, as race committee, we always go in and check everybody's numbers. I go look up and be like, yep, oh, they put in the right number. No, they didn't put the right number in. I'll adjust it. We like it though when you get close enough, but be mindful they're going to give you these kind of additional numbers. And so that would be your rating that you would have for your handicap. If you had a boat and let's say someone else came in. Yeah, you got some adjustments. He's happy about his adjustments. Things that they adjust based upon parameters that you give them. So like if you had an oversized head sail, they might like deduct from your rating, you know. Oh, you have this, you know, I think I get a big credit because I have a fixed 3-bladed prop, which is like big drag. So they like give me a credit for that. So they do these adjustments. I will say this, if someone came in and said, like if you guys came in, you had your Catalina 30, and like you go like, I don't have a certificate, I would do what I just did. Catalina 30. Yeah, it looks like what they're telling this rank. Oh, this is their number. And I'm just going to throw that number in there. So for casual on Wednesday night, that's probably what we would do. It's usually best though. I mean, it's not that much to get a certificate. So you just fill it out. It's a little bit of a measurement. And if you have any questions, you can always talk to them and stuff like that. So any questions on that really quick? No? Good. All right, the other one that I'm going to do is, and I'm going to go through here. Yeah, I could do, yeah. Yeah, go through CAS, that's probably best. So Chicago area, or ChicagoSailRacing.org. There we go. This is the CASR website. So if you're interested in any of the weekend kind of racing, that's not club specific, if you will. I mean, they're run by a club, but if you're interested in this, this is where you would kind of go to the CASR website. Races, register, and you go and scroll down. Here's the calendar for this year. It's already up, and as you can see, like, oh, you know what, I want to do, we're gonna do the Chicago Waukegan this year in my boat. So I would go over here, click register, and it brings us then to the yacht scoring page for this event. This is where the race committees are really going to kind of put everything. So I could go in here, fill out the online registration form, you know, and so, oh, I don't know. I thought I clicked it. Oh yeah. I don't have my login. I'd have to put in my login, whatever, and then it would go through the registration form where I put in my name or whatever, my boat, my handicap, whatever. All the information to say like I want to go payment page, I can pay my registration fees for that. You know, each race is going to have a registration fee. And then you could show up. We could see, like, for example, current registration list. So 5 boats have already registered saying that they decided they're going to do this particular race. You could see who you're racing against. A couple Beneteau 36.7s, J111, J34, a Beneteau 25. All right. Looks good. We'll do good this year. Is it? Oh. This here, though, you can see here, they got a link, notice of race. Click on that. And it load. I do have a kind of copies here. You can look at it, but this is then the notice of race that covers that event. When they post the SIs, the sailing instructions, this would kind of highlight. If there's amendments, you would see it there. So I'm actually going to go really quick. I'll go select another event. Let's see here. I know last year we put in the Gold Star Regatta, we put an amendment. So I'm going to search for that. So the 2021 Gold Star, for example, this is an event from last year. You can see here, right, we have the notice of race, we have the sailing instructions, and we had a couple of amendments. Here was an amendment where we said, oh, we changed the racing area and the course. Here's the new course, here's the new racing, you know, kind of thing. And so this is now amending what that original thing here. And kind of like Luke said, we said, you know, we didn't decide what our section breaks were going to be until like that last minute. So we posted it as an amendment to say, here's the class breaks and sections. We're going to have one jam section. We're going to have one perf section for all the spinnaker boats. Here's when you're going to start. Here's what you are. Fly either the J flag or the one flag, right? Based on your section. Granted, this was kind of a casual race. So if you didn't have the right flag on your backs there, you didn't have one on your side. We knew who you were. We figured it out. It's okay. And also here you can kind of see like, you know, the marks of the course will include Metro Mark 4, which is part of this circle that has the approximate location. There's your Latin Rome, right? So like you punch this in your GPS, you can see where that is. We usually try to be really good about putting latitude and longitude for fixed marks. It's like, you know, everybody should know where it is. So any questions on that? Any sense? Yeah.
And the other thing we also say can show that the finished results and all that.
Oh, sure.
Show up here as well. This is a small race, so you're not gonna have tons, but
They had here, I would say, oh yeah, race one. Oh, there's one race. So here is the spinnaker. Here's the non-spinnaker section. We will talk about these here. There's, you know, these boats here. So first place was Paradigm Shift, followed by Archimedes 3, Mary Gale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
so we're bringing up the rear.
Well, you're not the full rear. There was someone who didn't show up. We call these the letter. You'll see these here. You might see these in finished results. Talk maybe a little bit about it more. So these boats actually get a place, and then this gets what they call a letter score, which is some acronym that means what they didn't get a placement because in this case DNC did not compete, which means this was a boat that registered. They didn't even show up to check in. So they didn't compete. So we just mark you as DNC, and they got one more place than the number of boats that showed up. So 7 boats showed up. I think it did 8. There's 8 in the section, so they added one more and they got 9. And then you can see here, DNC, and then this person, RET, retired, which means they showed up, they started, and then halfway through the race, they decided, we're done, we're not going to finish the race. And so they retired.
That could be a number of reasons.
Yeah, they might have been like, we're tired, we don't want to do it anymore, we had an equipment problem, whatever it is.
If you retire, it's good practice to notify race committee. If it's near shore here, you just get on the radio and radio them and make sure they acknowledge it. If it's like across the lake, the radio's not going to work. Usually in the sailing instructions, there will be a phone number or email address. And the race committee likes that just to make sure at the end of the day they're accounted for anybody. So if someone's missing, we should probably figure that out.
We do, and we do. We sit there.
Especially on a across the lake race where anything can happen in the middle out there. And if someone doesn't show up at the other end, it's sort of a, do we need to call the Coast Guard? Right? Race committee likes to know if you're retired. It's important to let them know.
It's easy enough. We've retired. Okay, thank you. Check off. This would also be the other one if we talked about if someone was over early and they didn't come back. There is a, we call it OCS on the course side. So you'll see that. And that basically means like they were over early, they never started. You know, you don't get a finish. You get a penalty, you basically get this letter score. There's all these other ones. We don't go over all of them. Any questions on that? I will say this is what you might see for like if you do weekend Casra races, all the Casra races will be there. If you do the Casra casual series, if someone talked about the Rainbow Regatta, the Cold Star, we'll have them on there. If it's like the JPYC Wednesday night, our results, we go on Excel in the office here and then we print them out and then we post them downstairs or we'll hand them out to people as they're waiting after the race. It's a little bit more informal. And the same is true, I think, like at Burnham and stuff too. If you did like Wednesday night at Burnham, someone goes in the back, prints out the results, and then like, here, have a copy. Here, you can have a copy. See how you did, right? It won't be necessarily all online like that. So that's what you will see. Anything else? Questions? Nope.
Registration. Good.
All right.
This is the fun part.
Yeah, the fun part. The racing rules of sailing Let me get over here so I can.
Other side.
No, I'm trying to get my. All right. So the racing rules of sailing. The racing rules of sailing are a set of international rules. It's actually defined by an organization that's called World Sailing. It used to be the International Sail Federation, I think ISAF or whatever. So there's the World Sailing set this. National authorities can add kind of their own addendums, but then the idea is these are the rules for racing everywhere. And so all the national authorities like US Sailing or maybe the German Sailing Authority or the Australian Sailing Authority, they all get together and they all decide like, this is what we want to say. This is how we run races. These are the rules for races. That way we can have international competitions and it's not like you guys do everything, backwards from us. One of the things that's very important is they get updated every 4 years. It's actually tied to the Olympic cycle. The idea is they will immediately after a Summer Olympics, they will set that following year. This is the racing rules for the next 4 years. And so in essence, everybody's competing for the next set of Olympics. The rules do not change. And that's the other important thing is for that 4-year period, nothing changes. They might start talking in committees about things that might be, what we want to change and stuff like that. But then it will come out in that next period. And then there's usually the run up, that lead up period. So like in 2020, since we are now in the 2021-2024 racing rules of sailing, in 2020, there'll be all these notices from like US Sailing or World Sailing of like, here's everything we're going to change. And sometimes there's small changes like, we just updated this, updated that. Sometimes there's big changes. I think it was in the 1997 one, they changed how like windward leeward rights were defined. And it like changed a lot of stuff. So sometimes there's big changes, sometimes there's little changes. You might be mindful of what's going on. The best person, like if you're really not sure, you could go online and see them. They do publish all this stuff. We kind of keep it open. But you could also ask a race committee person. Your local race committee, be like, do you know what's going to be happening? Some of them will be like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know, but a lot of them should know like what's going to happen in the next go around. I think the big one that they happened in 2021 is they reorganized how the documents work. And I think maybe hopefully they're better, but we'll see. So that's what you have. Obtaining a copy. So we live in the digital age. A digital copy, you can go to US Sailing. If you're a member of US Sailing, you can get this free. If you're a member of US Sailing, you can get this racing rules app that goes on your phone. And it has the whole racing rules of sailing. Let's see if I can show up. Let's see. RRS. Yeah, I have it. I know I have it here. Racing rules. I have my racing rules app. I'll log in with my ID or whatever. And then it'll have the racing rules. The app is actually really nice because it also has a way that you can like fill in a protest report digitally and stuff like that. So there's some kind of nice things. But you can have it. You could also purchase a hard copy, paper, waterproof version. So this is my copy. I purchased it. I think if you're a member of US Sailing, it's like $7.
Yeah, it's not bad.
If you're not a member, it's like 30. They charge you 30. But if you're a member of US Sailing, it's like $7. You can get one copy, and it's nice to have. Also, like you can have this on board if you ever have a question. It has all the rules, but it also has like these nice little things. We talked about all the signal flags. Here's all the signal flags. Here's what each of them mean, kind of, for example, if you see this particular thing. So there's lots of good little references in it. You can also get what's freely available is the US prescriptions and appendices. Those are available online as a separate PDF. You do not need to be a member of US Sailing to download that. There's a way that you can go to their website and download that directly. You can download a PDF of the World Sailing rules. So most of what's in RRS here is basically from World Sailing, and then US Sailing makes a few little adjustments and a few little like addendums or adds a few appendices, which you can get from there. If you go to World Sailing, you can go and click on their Inside World Sailing on their menu bar. You go to Rules and Regulations, select Racing Rules of Sailing, then you click on this here, and then you can download a PDF of the Racing Rules of Sailing if you want to go that way as well. I think we talked about the hard copy of RRS. You go to US Sailing, you click on Competition, Rules and Officiating. Here, Racing Rules, you click on there, and then you can basically go to a place to order. If you are a member of US Sailing, you can go in and log in as your member, and then they give you the discount so that you can buy it for just $7. So That would be kind of it. The organization of the RS. So up front in the racing rules of sailing, there's a couple definitions. So making these terms you talked about, a start, a finish, a mark. What does that mean in the context of the racing rules of sailing? Those are very clearly defined. Often what you'll see is when you read a rule, a word will be in italic because it means that we have a specific definition for that word in the RRS, right? You might say like it's a mark, but then the mark will be in italic, which means you go to that page and like there's a specific definition for mark that we in racing use to mean a mark, right? Which usually is what we normally think, but it's kind of like almost a specific legalese, if you will. Some of the basic principles of racing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then you kind of have the main parts, the fundamental rules. We'll talk about today is when boats meet. So when boats meet, well, meaning like two boats are going to potentially cross. We want to avoid collision at all costs. So who has rights? What do you have to do in that particular situation when two boats are trying to basically cross each other? There's other information about like, the conduct of the race. So like what the race committee has to do to make the race run, what's the starting sequence, all this sort of stuff. Other requirements while racing. If you want to do a protest or redress or hearing, we'll talk about that in a little bit. General instructions about entry qualification, race organization, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those you can get into. It's a lot of it's more of like, how do we run a race? Not necessarily like, what do you do while you're racing? You can definitely read over, but it's kind of like more of like what race committee does to make sure that we have a nice and fair race. There might also be a number of appendices. There's a number of appendices that are from World Sailing, and US Sailing has also added a few of their own. They don't take a letter of another appendice that exists in World Sailing. So you might see all the World Sailing ones, and then additional letters will add on for US Sailing. So for example, Appendix A defines the normal low point scoring system that we use. So if you're curious on how it works and all the details, that's what we have. We have all the instructions like how do we do low point scoring, discards, how do we score if you have this penalty or this kind of thing. All that information is then in Appendix A. We have, like, for example, if you're doing radio controlled sailing, there's an Appendix E. Appendix J has example notice of race and sailing instructions. So that information defines like what we put in these things. It's actually in the racing rules, if you're interested in that. Appendix U for dinghy sailors is this audible start system, which is an alternate system. So there's some of the appendices might be used, some of them may not be used. Usually in your NOR and SI, it might say like, hey, we're using this appendix. Like, for example, when we do the frostbiting of the dinghy racing, we'll say we're using the audible start system as defined in Appendix U. We'll say that in the NOR or the SIs, and that means look up there. That's all the information, right? Any questions so far? I'm just going to keep going. Let's people raise your hand if you have a question, and people on the Zoom could also do the same. Hold on a second. I want to get over here so I can. There we go. Have that here so I can just see. All right. So one of the key definitions is actually there is a definition for rule. What is a rule? So particularly the rule, if you look in the racing rules of sailing and you look up the definition of rule, the first thing it says a rule in this book, okay, kind of obvious. And that includes the definitions, the race signals, the introduction, preambles, whatever. There's some other ones is prescriptions from a national authority. So this is defined as kind of like World Sailing sets this. A national authority like US Sailing might say like, okay, you have this kind of thing, and now we're going to add on to it, maybe restrict it a little bit. You can almost think of like in some ways like, the federal government passes a law and then the states kind of like amend it a little bit to say like, well, we're restricting the, we're kind of just changing it a little bit. So those do define if there's any prescription in a national authority, that would also be part of the rules. So you might have your PDF copy from World Sailing and say, well, that thing's not in here. And then like, well, no, there's this one in US Sailing. We're in the United States. Of course, it says unless changed, etc. Class rules. So if you're doing one design, and Luke touched on it earlier, one of the one design fleets, they might have a class set of rules that define equipment or something. Usually it's related to like, what is the equipment on the boat? What can you have when you're sailing? Those sorts of rules in there. They do apply. If you're sailing under that class, they automatically basically apply. And usually in the NOR, they'll say, we will be, using the class rules as defined by the, say, like the T10, Tartan 10 class association. Now all those rules apply in that race, right? The notice of race, we make up if some sort of amendment or whatever we put in the NOR to say that this is going to change the conduct of that race, that would apply. If we do something in the sailing instruction, any other document that governs the event. So if we have an amendment or something like that, those all are considered the rules. So like everything just kind of layers on and applies as you go along, right? Is there any questions? I'm going to keep moving on. In the RRS, the first rule is safety. If you look in RRS number 1 is safety. Item 1, helping no danger. Any boat, competitor, or support person shall give all possible help to any person or vessel in danger. This is actually associated to basic normal kind of sailing, pole regs, watercraft related rules. Is we want to render aid to anyone. And I would say here, give all possible help as you can to anyone in danger. We want to be safe out there. Give as much possible help as you can without giving yourself some danger. I will say this much. If you go and aid someone, you're in the middle of a race, 2 things you should do. The minute you stop racing, the second you stop racing and you aid someone, mark that time down. Go render aid. Then mark down the time that you decided to regain and go back on racing, and tell the race committee, we will make that deduction any day, any day. You go out and aid someone, we're gonna adjust your score because you are adhering to rule number 1 right there. So we want to make sure everybody comes home safe. So just mark that down. I went and someone was man overboard, and at this time I left the course. We began, we went back on the course at a certain time. Boom, that's easy. It's an easy one. And just send it to the race committee. Say, hey, I want to redress. This is what happened. I don't think any race committee would. Yeah, I'd be like, yep, okay. Especially if they see, yep, someone was out there, you under day, done, easy. Number 2.
Real quick on that one. The other important point is the word all possible. So you were not asked to, if you can't safely get someone out of the water, you were not required to attempt. I think George mentioned, you don't put yourself in danger trying to help someone else. But if you can help them in any way, and that all possible way might be radio range, right? And so whatever is reasonable for you to do without placing yourself in danger does not mean you need to sacrifice, your boat and self in order to try and help someone else. It's reasonable prudence.
If there's an accident, you only want 1 boat out there that's in trouble, not 2. Don't increase the count. But yeah. Number 2, and this is kind of like we're reiterating basically what most national authorities like the U.S. Coast Guard say is life-saving equipment for devices, carry adequate life-saving equipment for all persons on board. Each competitor is individually responsible for wearing a personal flotation device adequate for the conditions. This also kind of basically says it's up to each person on board to be responsible for their own safety equipment as well, right? As a boat owner, you are responsible that you have adequate safety equipment on board, and then it's basically kind of in some ways as the crew have to be personally responsible. They can't say, well, you didn't tell me to put on a life jacket. They have to be responsible too. Granted also, the boat owner is in charge, and if the boat owner says, put your life jacket on, put your life jacket on, right? The boat owner says, this is the safety equipment you need right now. While we're racing, that's the safety equipment you wear. But in the same token, if you feel like, you know what, I want to have my life jacket on, it's also your choice. And you also be responsible for yourself. Along that lines, I would also say is, at least when it comes down to personal flotation devices, so any sort of life vest that you might have, or harness, inflatable harness, or whatever it is, the best thing to do is get your own, maintain your own, bring your own for that, because then it's in the right working order, it's going to work, it's going to be safe, and you're not dependent on, if I go race on someone else's boat, did they have one in working order? Is the air cartridge full? Did someone replace the bobbin recently? When's the last time they did the pressure test on the bladder, right? Get your own stuff, and maintain it and bring it. Whenever I go race on another boat, I always bring my own life jackets. Every time. Every time. If I need a tether, I bring my own tether. I'm bringing my own equipment because then I know I'm responsible for it. Any questions on that? The second rule, fair sailing. A boat and her owner shall compete in compliance with the recognized principles of sportsmanship and fair play. We all want to have fun. Let's not make this cutthroat. We all want to have fun. Boats can be disqualified if they're not found to be sportsmanlike. Race committee will do that. If there's a boat out there and they are clearly being unsportsmanlike. I mean, that's kind of the thing. It's like, boats push the edge and they're really competitive, but if they're like clearly being unsportsmanlike, I mean, they will get thrown out of a race. We want everyone to have a nice, it's supposed to be fun, right? It's supposed to be fun. So let's go out, have fun. Let's be Corinthian about it, right? Let's have a nice, fair race, right?
At the end of the day, you're racing quick to win. If you win, is a flag and maybe a pickle dish if you're lucky. It's not that serious, folks. There's no money in the line.
There is no money. Yeah. Considering how much you put into the boat, like, this is not a money-making enterprise in any stretch of the imagination, right? So yeah. 3 and 4 are really important. Number 3, decision to race. The responsibility for a boat's decision to participate in a race or continue to race is hers alone. No one is forcing you to be out there. You go out, you race, you have now decided you're racing. Race committee cannot force you to race. You can't be like, oh, but I did, I really wanted to, but the conditions weren't great. And you guys still had a race and it wasn't what I wanted. It's your call. The responsibility is on you whether to decide whether or not you want to race or not. Granted, most race committees don't want to have it out there where only the top 5% can survive in the conditions. Like we see things like this just does not look like fun. We're gonna abandon the race. So we try to keep it fun. We try to keep it competitive and fun. But ultimately it is your decision if you want to be on that course or not. And that is at any time. If at any time you're like, this is getting way too much for us, retire. That is you guys, it's up to you to decide when you want to retire. You don't have to wait for the race committee to abandon the race. Retire.
The rule on my boat is I extend that to all my crew too. Anybody in the boat is just not feeling it and it's reasonable. Not just like, oh, I would rather go get dinner, right? Like if you have a reasonable reason that you are just done, we're done. It's no questions asked, don't give more time, we're done. And last summer it turned out well. There was a storm brewing on the way to the 100 boats in the beer can, and we're all racing along. It was a lot of fun. And one of the guys who I sailed with, he's a former coaster, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "Luke, this is the kind of crap I used to pick people out of the water out of. I was comfortable sailing, but he wasn't, and especially being a former coastie, sails came down immediately. And 20 minutes later, we were 50 knots of wind, and I was really glad he knew that because I was kept going really bad to keep up. So I extend that to my crew as well. If you're not feeling it, we're done.
Everybody wants to have fun out there.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to have fun. Related to that, the acceptance of the rules. By participating or intending to participate in any event conducted under the rules. Did that definition of rules before, the NOR, the SIs, everything like that. Each competitor and owner agrees to accept the rules. So basically, this is like the signature line. If you show up on the race course, you have now made basically, you can almost like a legal action to say to the race committee, I accept everything you've put out in that document as how we're going to run the race. And that is it. I don't need you to click a button on a registration form or something signed. Your boat is out on the line. You have told me I accept everything that you've written down and I'm going to abide by that.
And that extends to consequences if something goes wrong. I was talking to someone earlier. If you were to collide with someone on a race, right? Your insurance is going to look at the rules to determine if you were vulnerable. I mean, it's a legally binding thing to that level. That just be, again, you didn't have to check the box. The fact that you were racing means that you're going to adhere to these rules, which are above and beyond the international flow rec stuff. And it has consequences.
Any questions? Oh, all right. Just summary. I don't know. We can go over this, but where are they published? I think the key one is it's like an international authority. They're kind of basically they're supposed to be universal every 4 years. So whenever you look at, they do put the number here. So in 2024, near the end of the year, I'm going to start looking to see what's happening next year, because in 2025 there's going to be a new book, right? And just remember, safety, make it fun, fair sailing. We want everybody to come home. We want everybody to have a good time. I think those are kind of the main principles, and everything tends to fall off of those. I would say a lot of it hangs off of basically those core principles, right? When boats meet. So this is the fun part. When boats meet, hopefully. All right. So when boats meet. So this is the idea is 2 boats are coming up and they could potentially be crossing courses or they might collide. So this is what we call boats are meeting, right? We're in a situation where one of the boats is going to have to maneuver out of the way so that the other boat can pass, right? And so this is all of what's called RRS Part 2, when boats meet. So Part 2, which all these kind of when boats meet rules, apply when boats are sailing in or near the racing area and intend to race or are racing or have been racing. So there's the COLREG rules, which some of those always still apply. So government regulations, like if there is a freighter and they have tonnage rights, this does not supersede it in any way, shape, or form, right? However, if you are now out there and like, I have gone and I've checked in, this now all applies to you above and beyond COLREG. So anything of the rules that are in here now apply as well, above and beyond what might be government regulations. If you're in the race, or if you just finished and you're kind of getting your way out of the race course. Under all those situations, we say that these are applying above and beyond the normal kind of rules of the sea, if you will, like the COLREGs. I would say once you're kind of like out of the racing area, so you kind of remember that kind of bubble we drew. Once you get outside of there, we would say like, if you've like, I've finished my race and I've started heading to harbor and I'm kind of like out of the distance of the race committee boat, we're not gonna, you're done. You've clearly finished the race. But what I would say is that little bit of time where you have just finished, but you're still in that zone, these still apply. So you still want to maintain. You won't be like, they gave me the horn, I finished, and all bets are off, right? Like you are still kind of governed until you basically kind of left the area where you clearly have just, you are now just the sailboat motoring home into your harbor, right?
And it's important, especially for buoy races, where there's sort of an interstitial time between heats, right? So between those times, you can have your motor on and be doing your thing, but you're still need to be following the rules to not be in other people's way.
Makes sense? The other line too, and they put this in here, when a boat sailing under these rules meets a vessel that is not applied by these rules do not apply because they are not racing. They do not categorize under this, right? It's just a boat that's out there, the freighter that's coming through. Then you have to comply with the government, right? So we don't supersede any of the government rules. This is like an overlay of it. So whatever other rules you might have, like if it's a government vessel, if it's a freighter, whatever it is, government rider rules, we never suspect them. We just add on to it just for people who are in the racing situation, right? All right. So when boats meet, there's basically kind of these 4 main rules that we're going to talk about here. So we talked about, I think when we just had the Sailing 101, we have the stand on vessel and the giveaway vessel. It's kind of the same sentiment we have. We call it, basically they use the term keep clear. So we don't necessarily, we might say like, oh, this boat has rights. Technically, the RRS never says that. They just say this other boat has to keep clear. And thus we infer that the other boat then has rights. But technically, all you read in the RRS is just says, if you have this situation, then this boat has to keep clear, which means basically they have to maneuver around that other boat can maintain their course, whatever course they have. So the big four, if you will, are on opposite tacks, a port tack boat shall keep clear of a starboard tack boat. On the same tack, but they're overlapped, a windward boat shall keep clear of a leeward boat. We'll go over these in a little bit. On the same tack, but not overlapped, a boat that's clear astern shall keep clear of a boat that's clear ahead. And while tacking can also mean jibing as well in the RS. So basically, if you're maneuvering where you're passing head to wind or whatever, you shall keep clear of all other boats until she's basically on a close hold course or any maneuver like that. So if you're doing a maneuver and you're flipping your sails over, you've got to keep clear of everybody, right? People aren't required to keep clear of you because you're making this maneuver at this point. Some of this will kind of make sense. The port starboard and the windward leeward, you can kind of think about it. Those are kind of weird. The clear ahead and the clear astern is really kind of easy, right? It's kind of like if you're driving the road, you can't slam into the guy in front of you, right? Guy in front of you has rights. You can't just drive into him. So you have to keep clear of the person in front of you. And if they're making some turn, like, you know, they got to keep clear of everybody. They just can't turn in front of the whole fleet and everybody's got to get out of their way, right? So on opposite tacks, racing rule number 10, when boats are on opposite tacks, port over starboard. A boat is on a tack, or the tack, the definition, if you go and look in the definition, it says tack, starboard or port. A boat is on a tack, starboard or port, corresponding to the windward side. So if the wind is blowing over on your starboard side of the boat, so here, this picture here, you can see this boat, the sails are over here, the wind's coming in this direction. So the wind is on the starboard side of the boat, their starboard tack. This boat is on port tack. The same is true downwind. So this boat here, we could see that the wind is blowing. This is the starboard side of the boat. The wind's blowing over on this side. They're also considered starboard tack. And then this boat is port tack, right? Both of these cases, the red boat basically has to keep clear of that green boat when they're doing the maneuver. So if this was here, well, hopefully this red boat would have figured out what to do long before they got to this situation, because right now they're kind of stuck when they're this close. So you would want to kind of keep an eye. One of the things is, I would say, in any situation, I always like to have eyes low. Meaning, if we're kind of going upwind, there's someone on the low side of the boat watching who's over there. Do we have anyone coming our way? Is there anyone we need to get up, maneuver around? Number one. Number two, is there anyone we need to yell at to tell them they should go around us because we're on starboard? Both situations are very important. So even if you have rights, that doesn't mean you should just like steam along and everybody else has to watch out for me. You can give someone a gentle reminder and yell out. You'll hear it, starboard. Oh crap, I gotta do something, you know?
It's easy to lose someone behind the jet. We've all done it, right? Big bed sheet in the way.
I didn't. Yeah, it happens. Luckily, the 420, when you hit, it's boom. Oh crap! You're doing an offshore boat. You probably got fiberglass work to do. It gets expensive. So, in a big boat, you don't want to have any touches. But it's always best is to watch that other boat. And we'll also talk about it later. It's just exactly. Just one. So we'll see that later. But yeah, always kind of keep your eye out there, see what's going on. If there's a boat that should be keeping clear of you, you can hail them and be like, hey, what do you want to do? You know, kind of thing. Also, if you see a boat coming up and they're not paying attention to you, and maybe it's like one of these close ones where, man, it's a lot to duck. And maybe you're like, maybe I can clear you. You know, you'd be like, what do you want to do? And maybe the guy's like, yeah, just go ahead. You know, I don't want you to futz around me. Or there's a way that you can actually lee bow them, where you tack right on their lee bow right here. And it actually slows down the other boat because of the dynamics of the wind. So, you know, there's all these kind of things. But I think one of the things is be communicative with your other competitors. Sometimes can be helpful to clarify these situations and know what's going on out there. Okay. All right. Is there any questions? Hopefully that's kind of easy, but the right-of-way overlap. So one of the things is it's kind of the definition of clear astern. So a boat is overlapped if neither boat is clear astern, right? It's kind of the way we define it. So one boat is clear astern of another when her hull and equipment in normal position for those conditions are behind a line, a beam of the aftmost point of the other boat's hull and equipment in their normal position. The other boat is clear ahead. There's an overlap when neither of those boats is clear astern. So we kind of do this diagram here. We have this purple boat and we have this blue boat. This blue boat, we can put like an imaginary line, a beam of the aftmost point of their boat. That's this little blue line here. And if I stretch that out to basically infinity, I can see it doesn't intersect with any part of that purple boat. That purple boat is clear astern, right? This boat here, I could see that this boat, the yellow boat and the blue boat, if I draw that imaginary line for that yellow boat, it does intersect and basically cross over the blue boat. The blue boat and the yellow boat are now overlapped. So overlap rules come. If I look here at this reddish boat or orangish boat and the yellow boat, I could see that there's also no overlap. The orange boat is clear ahead of the yellow boat, right? So it's kind of this overlap thing. It's a little bit tricky. You'll kind of get a hang of it, I think, when you're out there. And of course, this is just showing instances like everybody here is going downwind, everybody here is going upwind. It's the same idea, right?
And I forgot to mention it earlier. We were talking earlier. Back years ago, this wasn't it. It was had to do with your mast.
That's the beam.
Right. That was ill-defined, and this is pretty clear cut. We can all just inherently know what overlapping is, right? You're overlapped. You're in front of it, in front of someone's transom. It gets a little touchy if everybody's not going exactly in the same direction. But that sort of shows how to communicate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Liz was that's the beam. I'm like, that rule was retired in '96. Last time you read the RRS. She was in college, yeah. It's like, what do you mean master beam is not a rule anymore? Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yes. Usually that is if I was in that situation. So let's say I'm on the green boat and that red boat is just not paying attention. And I'm watching like they're going to collide with us and they have no one. I see no eyes on their low side staring at me. Yell starboard at them. Hey, I'm over here. I'm a starboard boat. You got to keep clear of me. At the point, you might like decide what to do, or maybe they hail back or whatever. But it's usually like that opening kind of thing that you would do. So yell starboard. In this situation, when we get into overlap, you don't say starboard because, you know, here, everybody's starboard. So if the blue boat yelled the yellow boat starboard, he's like, yeah, so am I. What's your point? Right? You know, so in that particular case, when you have the crossing, the starboard is saying, I'm a starboard boat, you're not. I have right of way, basically, because you got to keep clear of me. What do you want to do?
It's generally considered good form to remind your competitors that they might be putting themselves in a bad situation. Yes. Right. Because they might not see you right behind the jib. They might be new and not entirely confident in what starboard versus tack means. And a little bit of reminder might go, oh crap, they're right, right? And you don't know what's going on. Maybe they think they're going to make it from you, but at least you've sort of given them a nudge like, hey, pay attention, we might have an issue.
Yeah, or you might be, you know, oh, I think I'm going to make it. And you might be by sailing starboard like, I don't think you're going to make it. You know, I'm like saying, listen, I think I'm going to have to maneuver around you if you keep up and don't move and don't keep clear. And that's usually what that's kind of communicating very quickly. Starboard. Oh, you got to do something. Great question. Anything else? Here, well, we're going to talk about that in a second. Right away, when you have overlap, we'll get over to this. In this particular case, I'll have a slide later. The leeward boat, the windward boat has to keep clear of the leeward boat. And we'll talk about that in a second.
So overlap is just determining if those rules even apply.
Because
There is no overlap. Windward, leeward doesn't mean anything, right? But the moment that you overlap each other, now we need to think about who has to keep clear.
Right.
And that comes down to windward boat.
Yeah. And again, this is everybody's on the same tack. As you can see, all these boats. If one of these boats is on a different tack, then this rule applies.
There's precedence to it. The first rule is opposite task, port starboard. Then windward leeward doesn't matter. Port starboard takes precedence. As soon as you're on the same, whether it's port or starboard, both are on the same tack, then we have to start looking for this.
And then we have to say, like, okay, do you have overlap? If you have overlap, then this applies. If you don't have overlap, then that applies. One other little tricky thing about overlap is, so this is a fun situation. You can also basically have overlap with another boat if there's a boat basically that has overlap with both of you. So here's showing a situation where if I have this orange boat and the blue boat, if the yellow boat is here, there's no overlap. But because that yellow boat in between has overlap with both the orange and the blue, all three of these boats are now overlapped with each other. So clear astern and clear ahead doesn't apply between red and blue in this case. It's windward leeward because they're technically all overlapped. It's a great big kerfuffle is what it is. The trick one is don't be the yellow boat. Usually in this situation, don't be the yellow boat, be the orange boat. At least here, and in this situation, you probably want to be the yellow boat. Granted, you're being blanketed by everyone, which means you're slowing down anyway. So I try to avoid it in general, but you know, this does apply when you kind of get this kind of multiple overlap. It's transitive. I would say though, usually in this situation, you're often close enough that you're communicating with each other, and you might be like, "Leeward," and he's like, "Yeah, I got someone too," and like, you know, we'll work through this together, right? We're gonna all work through this together. So, on this,
if you guys sail 100 boats on a beer can, this is gonna happen to you. It's a blast to sail, but this is gonna happen. And literally, we did a rounding 7 wide, and everybody's yelling at everybody, but it all basically came down to like, just stand your damn line. We're gonna get through this.
yeah. everybody get ready else tomorrow. We'll all sail straight. So, anyways, so now you've said I'm on the same tack. I've decided whether we've determined we have overlap. If we have overlap, then windward shall keep clear of a leeward boat. The easiest way that I think about it is if you're the windward boat, you have all the breeze in the world and you could probably do whatever you want. If I'm the leeward boat, I'm getting blanketed by you. So it's kind of limited where I can go because you're sitting on my wind. That's at least how it worked in my mind to figure out windward versus leeward. So ultimately, like if you were the leeward boat, you basically have the right of way, if you will. The windward boat has to keep clear of you. This applies both in the upwind situation here. So this boat needs to keep clear of this boat. In this situation, you're going downwind. The blue boat needs to keep clear of that yellow boat in that situation. Okay, both upwind and downwind. If you have overlap on the same tack, windward shall keep clear of leeward, regardless of which way you're sailing. Okay. If you are not overlapped, you decided, nope, he doesn't have overlap, then the boat that is clear astern must keep clear of the boat that is clear ahead. Let's say something. Go ahead. Nope. All right. If you got a question, you can speak again. All right. If you are not overlapped again, I think of this as like, right? You can't plow into the guy in front of you when you're driving down the street. Right? If the car is in front of you, you can't hit them. You got to keep clear of this car in front of you. Same kind of idea. If there's a boat clear ahead of you, you've got to keep clear of them. You might be like directly pointing at them. And I think we talked about this in like Sailing 101. You might be a little bit off. But if you are both kind of going in the same direction on the same tack and they're clear ahead and clear stern, you also have to basically keep clear of them. Granted, if you are not aiming straight at them, you got a lot of room to play with. So you don't have to do much maneuvering to keep clear of them. But you can't basically like come up on them, right? Any questions on that? I know it's kind of a lot.
And so the call here, you know, Carmen mentioned yelling starboard, right? It's similar situation. If you're in an overlapped windward leeward issue and you feel that the other boat needs to get out of your way, you yell at them, you know, leeward, as a reminder, hey, I'm over here, I'm overlapped. I feel like I have maneuvering rights over you, and that's a reminder to them that they need to pay attention to you.
They might be doing this, you know, you might have a situation like this windward boat, maybe you have a gate there and that blue boat is really aiming for the gate and you're like, listen, I'm going this way. If you want to go that way, you can go behind me. And I've been in that situation. We're all going downwind and maybe we've decided we want to cross through the far side of the gate. Guess what? I get to cross through the far side of the gate if I'm the leeward boat. And if this windward boat's like, no, I want to go there, like, fine. You can duck behind me. Right? You can duck behind me. I'm going this way. You have to keep clear of me. And you can say, leeward, leeward. And sometimes, I think it mostly applies when you're here, when you're going downwind, because then you really have like these angles and people are doing this. Usually when you're going upwind, you're kind of like just close hauled and just pointing that way. And there's not as much movement. But when you're going downwind, you'll get these kind of things and people are coming in this way or that way.
The only time it ever comes into play upwind is because the birds that everybody's generally pretty close hauled is if you're trying to pass someone. You know, it's always the hard decision. You go to the windward side of them, then you've got all the wind in the world, but they can maneuver to not make it easy on you, right? They can't really prevent you necessarily. Hopefully you can outpoint them. Or you go to lure to them, you have rights, but then you're in the wind shadow. And it's always the crux. Which way do you do it? Is this guy going to jam me or do I go around?
And I think that mostly depends on the size of your boat, the size of that other boat, how fast they're going.
Right.
And how nice of a sailor you might be. Right. I will say this much, usually if we're racing, if I'm on like a bigger boat, and there's a smaller boat that's out there, let's say I'm in sailing Perf 2, so pretty fast spinnaker boat, and I see this little jam boat, it's like, we'll just go hold them. We will blast through their wind shadow in like no time. If we go sit on them, it's not going to be fun. So we'll just like crack off a little bit, go around behind them, you know, and that way we're just going to steam past you. We're not going to get in your wind shadow. We're not going to play games with you and stuff like that.
And if that's the case, if you are that little boat and you can see that that's what's happening, and the fine's roaring up from behind you, and clearly they're probably going to go over and just punch through your shadow, don't give them a hard time about it.
I would say the best thing to do is in that situation is if you have a big boat behind you and your little boat, you point as high as you can. Like, so if you're close hauled, you keep that boat close hauled as much as you can. You're going to telegraph to them, listen, I ain't giving you space on the high side. Can you please go low? Especially if they're cute, and they will. If they're good, mine is nice enough. They'll just like, I mean, yeah, it's like you're going to be what, slow me down for 2 seconds? You have a question?
I saw this video last night on this, and it said a lure boat, windward has to be clear, but the lure boat has to give them space that they can.
Yes.
Yep.
So like they were talking about examples of shields. So like they're coming up 1 feet. And the shields wants to round up their stern or hip in order to give way, but that's not.
We'll get into that.
Literally happened to me, where I was in a windward boat, and someone came up and said, you know, take it up, head up, get out of the way. And I went to do so, and my stern quarter hit their beam. I heard it fall.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you do have to. I don't get it. There are general limitations. This is the general rule. And then, yes, we put those as limitations. So what it is though, in that situation, and we'll talk about it better, is the windward boat still has to keep clear, but the leeward boat is required to give room so that they can keep clear. So the leeward boat still has rights, but they got to give them room so that that boat can keep clear. So that boat is still always required to keep clear. You got to give them room. So yes, it's a tricky line. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So if you're the little boat and you're coming around first, he's coming up on the top.
Well, first off,
You can't give him any room.
well, we'll get into that too. When you're coming to a mark, there's also special rules with that.
Okay.
We will talk in that. There are all these qualifications for room because yes, it's like you can't just spin a boat on a dime, right?
Right.
You're going to come and equipment's going to move around. So you have to give that person reasonable time so that they can keep clear, right? You can't just park right up next to me like, you got to keep clear of me. Like, you've got to give me the ability to keep clear of you, and I will.
Just like everything, right? This
Yeah.
is all up for interpretation, and the key is reasonableness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
seem to me that no matter what the rules are, if you're gonna hit somebody else and let somebody you, you gotta get out of there. Just get out
Right there. Avoiding contact.
General limitation.
Right. It's not working. You just gotta get out of there.
Yes, that is entirely true. And that is rule number, after the general limitation for all these rules is, number one, avoid contact. I'm on the starboard tack boat. There's a port tack boat coming in. I'm yelling at them. I'm yelling at them. I'm yelling at them. I'm yelling at them. They're not doing anything. I duck them and then I protest them. That's what I do. I duck around and I protest them and said, you did a penalty. And someone did that to me on a Wednesday night race once. And I did. I protested him and he went and did his penalty turns. So that's exactly what you do. You avoid the contact and then you said, you fouled me. Now go do your penalty, right? That's exactly right. Related to that, acquiring right of way. When a boat acquires right of way, she shall initially give the other boat room to clear. Kind of relates to that. If I am tacking or I'm jibing, let's say I'm coming down and we're both windward leeward and the other guy's on port and I decide to jibe and now I'm on starboard. Well, you know what? I got to give them room to get out of my way. I can't just jibe on them and be like, move, right? They're not going to move. So I have to be like, okay, I'm going to give you room and you got to now get out of my way. But I got to give them that room. And we'll talk about room actually has a definition too. It has to relate to both time and space. So room can be both time and space for them to move, right? And then changing course. So if I'm doing a course change, this also relates to, let's say we're on windward leeward, right? And let's say it's kind of broad reach, but then I decide, you know what? I want to go up higher and I'm the leeward boat. I can't just trim up and go wham. I got to go like, I'm coming up. And I start yelling, I'm coming up, which means you got to get out of my way. And so I have to give them that time and space so that they can keep clear me. I can't just wham up into them and be like, I was moving. I'm leeward. Get out of my way, right? I have to give them the ability, reasonable time to kind of get out of my way. Any questions on that? There's other limitations. This is a special limitation on the same tack proper course. So this is a fun one. Leeward, when we're leeward, let's imagine I am that boat up ahead and this other boat comes from behind. Boom, they're steaming along. They come and they are now leeward. They can go, well, I want to go up that way. And now they're like, you know, you were clear stern, you came up behind me, now you're going to stuff me into the wind, right? So there is actually a limitation of what's called proper course. If a boat clear astern becomes overlapped with, this, I think it originally had an animation. If a boat that is clear astern becomes overlapped within 2 of her hull lengths of a leeward, to leeward of a boat on the same tack, she shall not sail above her proper course. So if these 2 boats are here, and say this yellow boat's coming up fast, and as you can see, it's within 2 boat lengths when it then gains overlap. On the leeward side, she's the leeward boat, she has rights. If the mark is here, she cannot sail this way. She has to sail the course. She can't just fluff the guy out. She can't just bring the guy out. She has to sail her proper course. She's now limited. The other boat has to keep clear, but where that leeward boat can go is now limited because the leeward boat acquired that like status, if you will, from clear stern. They're coming up behind, and now I'm here. They can't go, oh, we're coming up, and pushing the person off course.
What if you're far away from one?
Doesn't matter if that is your proper course. Let's say, here's what you say, for example, what you can do is, let's say I have a boat that comes up and they're coming up on my windward side, right? Coming up on the windward side, we're close haul. I don't want to come up on my windward side. So what I do is I start pinching. And it basically dusts them off because they're going to start pinching too to keep the top of me, right? You know, because otherwise they're going to fly. So they're going to have to do that. And that's going to slow them down. It'll slow me down a little bit, but I can do that. If I now, let's say I came behind here, I can't do that.
Because my proper course is close haul. I shall not sail above that. That's not really proper course.
Yes, because you can weaponize this, right? If you sail up to someone and you just get your bow just past their quarter, you're close, you can yell at them, head up, right? And they would have to luff. Well, that's weaponizing the rule. That's sort of not really sportsmanlike if you do that all the time, right? So that's why, 2 boat lengths gives you room to
Did it happen to you? Someone do that to you?
No, I mean, I would get
Yeah, you would. No, it's easy. Now you know. Can't you start yelling at me? You're like, you have to sail your proper course. You start yelling proper course at them.
yelling at each other, right? You're yelling proper course.
Proper course, proper course. You just start yelling proper course, proper course. And then you could set up.
And I think it's important to understand the definition that George has up here of proper course. So proper course is defined as the fastest way to sail from point A to point B in absence of any other boats. So obviously, heading up actually late upper side of the mark doesn't make any sense, right? If it's close hold, then you've laid the mark, right? If you're close hold, you're just going to perfectly make it close hold. Proper course isn't going above close hold. It's going to be slow.
And I was going to say, actually, this could apply to, let's say, for example, you have 2 boats that are going downwind and there's a gate. One boat kind of comes up behind and decides I want to go to the far end of the gate. So they start luffing them up. That was also, you could say, no, your proper course is the shortest distance to that gate. And actually that's one, in that situation, you have now lost the choice. So if I had, there's a boat in front of me, we're going downwind, we're aiming to this gate. And he's aiming towards the left side of the gate. And I come along behind like this. And they're like, I want to go to the right side of the gate. Nope. The fastest point is right there. And I cannot now go and say, I want to go to the far side and you got to come up with me. Nope. You are now limited and you have to go the shortest distance. Yes.
So you could tap and it's still theoretically.
Well, there's always another mark, right? There's always somewhere you're going to. If you are close hauled, right? You can't sail above close haul. That's not a proper course on a sailboat, right? Because you're just going to go into irons, right? So if we're going upwind, we're not exactly pointing to the mark. I cannot sail higher than close haul. That's not a proper course. It's not the fastest way to get there if you're sitting in irons going.
And there's, this is where it gets dicey, is I can outpoint George, right? So, but I think this proper course might be different than him because I can outpoint it by 5 degrees.
But then I would probably start complaining very loudly to say, listen. Listen. I'm sometimes on race committee, right? No, we wouldn't say that. But yes, this also then comes to the sportsmanlike part. You're not really being sportsmanlike if you're just taking this little boat and heading them up to the wind so that they get, stuck in irons and now lose all their boat speed, right? But there's a rule that basically, like Luke says, it prevents the weaponizing of the windward lure kind of thing. Any questions on that so far? Those are the basic rules. I'm going to, the summary is the main ones. So port tack must keep clear of starboard tack boat, right? Easy, hopefully. If on same tack and overlap, windward must keep clear of leeward. With the caveat, leeward boat may be limited to proper course depending on how that boat gained that position. If on same tack and not overlapped, clear astern must keep clear of boat clear ahead. This one's kind of easy to figure out. And then while tacking or when you're doing any maneuver, you got to basically keep clear of everybody else. I can't go on a big tack and be like, shove everybody over. I've got to okay, I need to make sure I have the space that I can do it because I know while I'm in the middle of that tack, I have no rights and I got to keep clear of everybody, which is hard to do because in the middle of the tack, usually you're stopped kind of. Right? It's really hard to keep clear when you're really not going very fast. So you want to think about where you don't want to tack in a bunch of traffic, right? You want to try to make it. Any kind of questions on that? We're going to move on to kind of the room part. So This relates to kind of, in particular, mostly at marks and obstructions. So mark room is a rule. This relates to when boats, applies to boats when they are required to leave a mark on the same side. And at least one of them is in this. There's a definition for the zone. And the zone is the area around the mark in which within a distance of 3 hulls of the boat that is nearer to it. And then a boat is considered in that zone if her hull is anywhere. Basically, we show this here. So I have this little orange triangle that's denoting my little tetrahedron for a mark. This could be anything. This could be the crib. This could be a guard mark. Whatever that mark is that we define as a point around the course that we're sailing, right? That is a part of that course where people have to go. And we're all this is marked, right? If I took this boat here that's kind of closer in, and this boat, let's say, is 30 feet, so 90 feet out, I draw a circle, the radius of a circle, that's the zone. In that zone, mark room now applies. That's that kind of special case. Now I have mark room, right? In this case here, I have, this one is usually, I mean, this is kind of easy. I mean, it's the leeward boat, the windward boat. So clear, this boat still is windward, so it still has to keep clear. So they've kind of set it up. So basically it's set up because most roundings are to port. Mark room doesn't usually always come into case because everybody's either in this situation where it's like, well, the boat that's closer to the mark is leeward anyways, so they already have rights, or potentially everybody's coming in on starboard to leave it to the left side. So it's like, it kind of like, that's one of the things is why we round everything to port, is because it basically sets it up that most boats, when they're coming around the mark, are probably going to be in the right position where they're going to have all the rights. And we don't have to start thinking about, well, wait a minute, now does that person have room, or do I have room, or what do I need to do? Granted, there's situations where it does come into play, but you know, this is what you got to think about. In most cases, like if you're doing a buoy race, we've kind of set it up so that you don't have to think. So room, when we say it, is we kind of delineate room versus keeping clear. We talked about that. Is keeping clear is that like right away. So a boat keeps clear of a right away boat if the right away boat can sail her course without need to take any avoiding action. So basically, they can keep sailing on. They don't have to make any wild maneuvers to get out of the other person's way. And it says here, when boats are overlapped, if the right away boat can also change course in both directions without immediately making contact. So making sure you have enough room so if that boat starts turning, they're not going to make immediate contact. Granted, room now is that space that a boat needs in existing conditions, including space to comply with obligations under any of the rules. So maybe you need to give a boat room. Like maybe you have rights. You got to give them room because they have another boat that they have to keep clear as well, right? So you got to give them room to maneuver as well. So that's the room. And that is often defined as maneuvering promptly in a seaman-like way, which of course is kind of a vague term, if you a little bit. But it's the idea is like, if you make a good and fair maneuver to like get around whatever you need to get around or make that maneuver, if you're going around a mark, you've given them all the room that they can do that without making collisions with you. They can go, they can make the dive around the mark, they can do it very nice and proper. You know, they don't get to like go and head off and like, oh, I'm gonna go take this mark wide. Like, no. I'm gonna give you room to go around the mark. You got to do it nice and proper. I'm not going to push you into the mark. I'm not going to do that. But you don't just get willy-nilly space, right? So there is kind of that line there that they put here. And of course, the mark room is specifically defined as room that is required for a boat to leave the mark on the proper side, right? So now this is kind of more the situation, giving the mark room, right? So when two boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room when you're in that zone. So that magic 3 boat length circle zone. If the boat is clear ahead when she reaches the zone, and the boat clear astern at that moment, shall thereafter give her marked room. So in this case, right, we have an inside boat and outside boat. They are clear ahead and clear astern. So this is clear ahead, this is clear astern. I mean, basically she has rights as well. But in this case, she also has the outside boat has to give her room. Here, though, maybe we had a little bit of overlap, maybe when it started. So maybe this boat was leeward, this was windward, right? But then this boat has to give them room to go around that mark. And I can't just push them up into the mark, right? A boat is required to give mark room even if later an overlap is broken and a new overlap begins. So let's say these two boats, when they started off, there was an overlap and they enter the circle. As soon as they enter the circle, they have room. If that, say, inside boat, blue boat, able to get enough speed away, yeah, no more overlap. We were already in the circle. It doesn't matter, you know.
The idea is things get complicated around marks, so it tends to sort of freeze things before you're really in this tight spot. So that as you're trying to maneuver around and you're flipping sails, you're jiving, maybe you're setting a spinnaker, you've got a lot going on. The last thing you need to be thinking about is another thought of what do I owe? Because it was already more or less established before you got terribly close.
Yeah. And that is kind of the thing. And you might hear people, like, if it's kind of a close situation, you get in that 3 boat length circle, you might say, mark room, like that inside boat go, I get mark room, we're in the circle. And they might say that. To say, like, I'm saying that you're in the 3 boat length circle, middle mark room. I don't care what else happens at this point beyond. I'm the inside boat. You might get overlapped and become windward. You might decide to tack or whatever, you know, there's some other limitations. But the idea is we've now set to say, I'm entitled to room. If anything changes, doesn't change the fact that I'm entitled to room around this mark, right? Again, though, with that room, let's say this boat becomes the windward boat and now has overlap, or leeward boat, excuse me, kind of creeps up, has overlap. This boat is still entitled to room, but they can't just keep like, oh, I'm going to take this wide today. Like, no, 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 no. You go around it nicely. You're going to get room. And I'm going to give you room, but you can't just go willy-nilly.
And the other good courteous thing is, if, you know, 3 boat lengths is well defined, but in reality is sort of hard to judge, probably. If you're approaching a mark rounding and you think this might be an issue, it's generally just good to hail the other boat, hey, give me mark room, just to make sure that they know you're there and they're not going to squeeze you out, because it might do it accidentally. They might be really focusing on that mark and planning on making a really tight turn and not even see it, right? Because you're just off their quarter somewhere. And it's good as you approach it, hey, I'm here.
Room at the mark.
Right.
I feel like they get so confusing around the curves because they have all the up. It's not one set mark.
Yeah, we're going to cover that one.
Because we did a race last year, but we kept going on attack because I knew we needed to be able to clear the government buoys coming back the other way. So like I just
the short story is
Yeah.
that whole thing is one mark. When you come up to 3 boat lengths to the first guard mark, you have room for the rest of the rounding. Yeah, and it is. People are like, well, there's not, like, no, this is one huge mark. You've approached it. I have room, because here's the thing: you are now limited when you're like going around those guard marks, right? Right? You're literally like, guess what? I got room this whole way. You can't be like, well, we got around the first buoy, so I'm gonna stuff you in between now.
we had
Yeah.
somebody tried to kind of stuff us, so we had to turn off.
Now, in that situation, you'd be like, I got room at the mark. And it's like the whole, it's the whole rounding. You are rounding that whole big thing.
And that one gets interesting too, because it's you could make an argument that it's seeming like to sort of overstand the first buoy, right?
Yeah.
Until you can clear the third one.
Yeah.
Really, you know, you
It
can
is.
argue it's seeming like to hug all 5
Yeah.
or wherever you need to go, but even though it might, it gets.
It gets very dicey. I say the best thing to do is the Corinthian thing to do is, if you are the outside boat, err on the side of give them room. Even if it's like, I don't know, just give them room. And you know what? Those crib roundings are a little bit tricky, and people sometimes lose a buoy while they're not paying attention. Oh, there's another guard mark. I forgot that one. You know, all of that. Give them, it's like, if I'm coming up on a boat and they're a little bit slower on me, and I'm coming up, I'm like, I'm just going to give them all the space in the world. I'm just going to take it a little wide, and you know what? I'm just going to get out of their way.
If they're going wide and you can cut inside them, just do it. Just
you know, let them do their thing. If it looks like they're gonna sit there and overstand it.
I would say though, be careful about cutting inside. That's
Well, yeah, you gotta be.
yeah.
That still applies all the way.
You've hit that first.
Now, several hundred yards from that crib.
So you've completed rounding that mark. It's a little bit complicated. Very few places have a mark that big, right? Usually it's a little buoy. That's easy. It's right there. I've gone around it, you know, a little pilot. I'm like, this is a huge thing. I mean, like 68th Street crib, right? It's 2 buildings with a whole series of guard marks. That's considered, we consider it. And I think also the Chicago community, because we just said like, it's one great big mark. Every race community that's in Chicago would say, that's one mark. It's one great big mark. So if you come up and you're within 3 boat lengths of that first guard mark and you have room, you now are entitled to room the whole way around because there's really nowhere else to go, right? Once you've started going around that thing, like if I'm on the inside, like I can't magically go somewhere else. I can't duck. Yeah. And actually, technically, related to that, I think it also kind of comes in the case when you're looking at, and usually when we set the offset is just at the edge of the 3 boat length circle. And so that also is also considered. So if you're coming around, like say a weather mark, and you have someone that like you're on the inside, you're entitled to room for that offset mark as well, regardless of whatever pandemonium is coming in. And it's oh, so the offset was like if I had, we do this sometimes on a windward leeward. So imagine where the little laser pointer is. Actually, it's usually like out here. We put the pointer, we put it out here. So the idea is we would have a second mark. Everybody comes around, they come around the first mark. They can't immediately turn back to go down course. They now have to go like out to where that laser pointer is. And so the idea is if I've established room here, I'm entitled to room all the way until I'm starting to go back downwind. Because basically at this point, when you're going between there and the offset, it's like, there's nowhere else to go, right? It's not like that's a second mark on the course and like this way.
And
It's like,
close that the zone for the first mark overlaps with the zone of the offset mark. So you're always in a zone and things are still frozen.
so yeah.
Sailboat sucks.
It actually does. I'd say the strategy is to be clear ahead of their start. Don't be given room and don't be getting room. That's what I would say. Be none of the above. Because it gets a little wonky at times.
And generally speaking, all these, if in doubt, be kind and see what like and give someone the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Yeah, we're not racing for $1 million. We're racing for a flag.
You know, you want to sit there and be like, oh, am I real? Is that really 3 boat lengths? Is it maybe 3.5? It's like, you know what? Room, you know.
Let me finish.
Yeah, exactly. Let the person go around the mark. A few exceptions. So this is an interesting one because we don't want to do this. Mark room does not apply if you have boats on opposite tacks going to a windward mark. So in that case, I cannot, as a port tack boat, come sneaking up into the little circle and be like, I get room. I'm port tack, give me room. Nope. Get out of the way. So in that particular case, if you're on opposite tacks going to a weather mark, you don't get room if you're port tack coming to try to sneak this thing in. The smart thing to do is lay your line way over here. And you will see this if you ever do a buoy race. It's like the parade starts forming at some point and everybody's like got this parade going down. And the poor soul who tries to sneak in, like you don't want to be that boat. Just don't be that boat. Find where your lay line is later and like, I'm gonna lay the mark. And it does. The little parade goes around. Everybody finds their spot. We decide where we're going around the mark. We all go around the mark very nicely. Let's see here. Between boats on opposite tacks, when the proper course for one of or both of them is not both the tack, it's basically kind of applied. A and B are about the same. Here's an interesting one. When a boat approaching the mark is one that's leaving it. So if you are leaving a mark, you are not entitled to any room whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. You've left the mark. You've passed it. You've rounded it. So this boat here, like they're going down to a lured mark and they're rounding it. This yellow boat is not entitled to room in any way, shape, or form. I'm inside. No, you rounded the mark already. Get out of the way. Also, one of the reasons why we usually put out gates and offsets and stuff, just like keep people away from the
The
dirt.
idea here is the yellow boat, when he rounded, decided to do a, 270, right? There's no reason he couldn't have just,
You could have gone this way.
right?
You decided to go this way.
Out of the way.
Get out of the way. If people are going around the mark, you could go around. You could have very easily gone this way, gone around the
Whereas the
purple boat.
purple boat has very few options of where he's going,
Yeah.
right?
And then it says if the mark is continuing obstruction, see rules. So if it's an obstruction. So we talk about marks. Marks are things that are defined that if you look in the SIs, this is something everybody has to go around and leave to a certain side of your boat. That is a mark. Anything else that's out there is an obstruction. So we do show the crib. Let's say we have a buoy race that's near the crib, but the crib is not part of the race course. The crib is now an obstruction because you can leave it either side you want. Like we didn't tell you what side you have to go around the crib. You can go to port, you can go to starboard, I don't care. It is now an obstruction. Maybe you're coming into, the Wednesday night, Casino Pier. The end of Casino Pier's got a definition, but the rest of it, what you want. Or there's like a government mark out there. Like we use the Clemson Shoal buoy as one of the marks, but there's another one nearby. You can go that way or that way. It's an obstruction. It's not part of the course, right?
Do these feel like sit also with your start line as well?
So the start lines are considered marks. So those are marks of the course because you have to leave them on a prop, right? If I have the boat in the start mark, I can't go that side of the start mark. I have to leave the start mark on my port side to go through the line. And I have to leave the committee boat on my starboard side to go through the line. If I go on the port side of the committee boat, I have not started, right? So a mark would be basically anything out there that you have to maneuver around, but sailing instructions say you have to do it a certain way. If it's just something else that's out there where the sailing instructions don't specifically say you have to leave it on a certain side, we now just call it an obstruction. Everything else.
A great example is if you're doing beer can racing for JPYC out here, and you're hemmed in on the entire south side by Casino Pier, and actually on the west side by the beach, right? Those are obstructions.
Technically, we're stuck on one side, but
Yeah.
we don't tell you in the SIs you have to do something. So the other thing, though, that can be an obstruction, and we have this here. Actually, another boat can be an obstruction. So I have a boat. Yes, it's here. A boat racing is not obstruction unless they're required to keep clear of her. So if I have, say, another boat that I need to keep clear of, they're basically an obstruction to me. And so if I have another boat that I guess I have to keep clear of them, they got to give me room to keep clear of that other boat. Say I'm stuck in a situation where I'm the windward boat and we're both on port tack and we're coming up on a starboard boat. Oh crap, I don't want to be in that situation. What do I do? But technically the one boat is, if for the leeward boat, that starboard tack boat is an obstruction to me if I'm that windward boat, because I'm required to keep clear of them, right? Likewise, too, in that port starboard situation, the leeward boat is an obstruction to me because I'm required to keep clear of them. So obstructions could also be other stuff that's just out there. A freighter coming by, right? It's an obstruction. And so, I might need room to maneuver on this obstruction. Boat, or I'm a port tack boat coming up. I'm like, the guy's yelling at me starboard. I'm like, there's a freighter here. Where do you want me to go? Usually that guy's probably going to be tacking too, because like you're going to go into the freighter too. So, you got to give me room because there's a freighter, right? So
straightforward stuff.
Pretty straightforward.
Don't make me have to choose between hitting you and hitting the thing. Let's just both avoid the thing.
Yeah, so we are given room to pass an obstruction. I was gonna say there are some, obviously if it's a mark, the mark room kind of applies. If there's right of way rules, you have to look at that as well. I think that's kind of the moral of that story, if you will. I mean, I have seen this. We were racing on Lake Peoria, which is like a wide spot in the Illinois River, and a barge went through the fleet. It was like pandemonium. Starboard. Nope. Give me room. And giving room. So if a boat is right away, if there's let's say, for example, I'm windward, we have windward leeward, we have the leeward boat, and we're coming up on an obstruction, right? And let's say, I think the easiest way to take that obstruction is to go to the right side. The leeward boat says, no, I want to go to the right side, or I want to go to the other side. They have that right. So the right-of-way boat can still define the course, right? So the right-of-way boat may choose to pass the obstruction on either side, right? When boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the boat the inside boat room, regardless of the situation. So you can choose to go on a particular side. So let's say, I have this obstruction, I have a windward boat, I have a leeward boat. The windward boat is basically the inside boat, and the leeward boat says, I want to go to the left. Well, they got to give me room to go around that thing, right? So they got to give me room to go around. If we want to go that way, or if they want to go to the right and they want to go this way, they have to give me room. Whatever they want to do. Granted, in that situation, if I can, I could tack and go the other way and duck around them, right? I'm always allowed that I can basically duck around the other boat and be like, you know what? Fine. You want to go that way? I want to go this way. I'm going behind you, and you can go do that. It's fine. Let's see right here. And while boats are passing a continuing obstruction, if a boat that was clear astern is required to keep clear becomes overlapped with the other boat and the obstruction, this is kind of like I can't sneak in between, right? So if I'm clear astern before I come up to an obstruction and I get into that kind of a zone of an obstruction, I can't be like, I'm going to sneak in. Now you got to give me room. Like, nope, you cannot. It used to be called barging. Used to be called barging. So let's say you're kind of coming up on the crib. Let's say we have to go, what would be like around this way, right? And so this is like the windward boat, and I'm the leeward boat. We're clear astern, then we come up, or the guy decides to go this way, and I'm like, I want room to come in here. Like, no, it's an obstruction. You could go that way around there, right? You don't have to come this way around.
You can't wedge yourself.
You can't wedge because you have an option.
Preventing people from weaponizing things, right? Because otherwise you could wedge your way in and force them to maneuver before they're good and ready, right? Which is weaponizing rules, is preventing you from doing this.
Any questions on that?
Coming in like at the start of pretty far leeward, and you come in on like a port. If you're kind of coming in, most everybody else is windward. You're going
0 and 4, you got nothing.
Yeah, but if you're far enough ahead, you still have to have at least 2 boat lines before you attack to cut into the
Yeah.
to get over and get on the race line, right? That's
Yeah.
sort of a-
It's tricky. You'll see most people, they all start lining up by the committee boat. It's also one of the reasons why we usually put the committee boat on the starboard side of the race. Because everybody wants to be on starboard, which means they're all going to be right by the race committee, so we can see what mayhem they're potentially doing. If they were on the bark side, be like, what is going on over there? I can't see, but they'll be like, all right here. And we can see, like, I think, if you're coming up to the start and there's like the start mark, yeah, maybe you'll hit it. No one wants to hit the race committee boat. They're going to give it room. Yeah, well, no, you got to give me room. Race committee boat. So, kind of a summary within the mark zone. We said, outside boat must give room to the inside boat. Room does not suspend any of the right-of-way rules. If a boat is required to keep clear, must continue to do so, even if there's some situation changes and how they basically like lost the rights, if you will. So maybe they broke that overlap, if you will, or gained or something like that. Basically, what it kind of does, like Luke says, it freezes everything in a time point when you hit that zone, so that like we're all clear what's happening while we try to get around this thing. once we're past this thing, then we can start thinking about changes again. But we've kind of frozen the state where everybody is in terms of who can do what in that particular case. An obstruction can be in a continuing obstruction, hazard of navigation, pier, a crib that's not part of the course. It could be another boat. So anyway, I have some examples here. So we have 3 scenarios. You can see the little wind arrow coming down from the top. So the question is, which boat must keep clear and why? Does any boat need to give the other boat room? So the first one is we have this purple boat and the yellow boat. We'll have the orange boat and the green boat. And we have the blue boat and the red boat. Purple and yellow. Anybody wanna, who must keep clear? And is there any sort of room situation? So who has to keep clear? Purple, that's right. He should have made a maneuver sooner. This is, you should, when you're over here, you want to start figuring out what you want to do, not here. Yes. Orange versus green. Green must keep clear. Why? Clear astern. If you draw that imaginary line on the orange, there's no overlap. Green is clear astern, right? Actually, if they did have overlap, green would be leeward in that situation, probably, wouldn't they? Right? Because if you draw their imaginary lines, this one's closer to the wind, because this one would be on the leeward side of that boat. No. If they were overlapped, if green came down closer, right? If green came down closer and had overlap, green would be leeward in that situation. If green came down and they had overlap, but they don't have overlap, so green is clear astern, thus must keep clear. Blue versus red. Yes, see, everybody see this? They're on opposite tacks. Blue is on port, red is on starboard. This is a situation you don't really want to be in. These are one of the ones, this usually happens like near mark roundings, right? People are coming around. Again, these are why there. Prevent these situations. Because basically, yes, the blue boat is required to keep clear of the red boat because the red boat is on starboard and the blue boat is on port. However, the blue boat, I mean, they're going to have to duck off, which is fine. They can duck, they can kind of fall off a little bit and go around, and that's what would happen. But it can get a little dicey when you start coming up to that mark, which is usually some people like decide to like lay the line or they go to the other side to come up on the right side of that mark out a little bit, not like right there. You know, you'll see the, like I said, you'll see the parade start to form. People kind of form in the back of the parade. You don't want to kind of get into these situations to get a little hairy. More examples, same thing. Blue boat versus the purple boat. What's going on here? Who has to keep clear of whom? And is there any room that I have to think about? Blue and purple have to keep clear of whom? Give room to whom? That's right. So right in this situation, this is also a situation. Try not to be the blue boat. You're all sorts of in a bad situation. So yes, the blue boat is required to keep clear of both the red boat and the purple boat. The red boat must give the blue boat room to maneuver around the purple boat, and the purple boat must give the blue boat room to maneuver around the red boat. It makes a nice little fun situation. Again, we like try to avoid it if we can. This is also something too, like if you're coming up, communication is key. I got a starboard boat coming down on me. Come on, right?
I'm gonna duck.
We're gonna duck them. You got to come with me, and that's legitimate. That is completely legitimate. Granted, he can't duck way over here. He's got to duck enough to get just around that boat, and that's it. And so the purple boat has to give the blue boat enough room to duck around the red boat, But the blue boat can't just go off the course. They got to duck around and come back up to course. So you're giving the purple boat is giving them room to keep clear. But it's a lot of this is again communication. Look at this guy. You got to give me room. The yellow boat versus the green boat. And look, we have a little mark here. They're both on port tack. So not clear stern, so we have overlap. So who is required to keep clear? So we have an overlap on the same tack. Who is required to keep clear? Windward, who's windward? The green boat is windward. Green boat is required to keep clear of the yellow boat. However, we're close to a mark. We're probably within 3 boat lengths. So the yellow boat must give the green boat room to maneuver around that mark.
So
Well, think about
the thing to remember is if you're in doubt, give the other guy a bit of room. Right? If you're new at this and you're in this class, so you're new at this, if you're ever in a situation you're like, I don't remember which version was it for George. Damn it, I wish I paid more attention. Just let the other guy like do his thing. It's fine.
I think what it is think about it this way, right? You could say, okay, this is the leeward boat. Technically, this is the windward boat. So you have to keep clear. However, we have a mark coming up. Don't be a jerk. Let the green boat go around the mark. Yeah, I could go wherever I want, but he gets to go around the mark. He's going like sailing. What would be the fair thing to do in this situation? Sure, the yellow boat could say, like, I need to come up and you got to keep clear of me because I want to come up and go this way. And he's like, I got a mark I got to go around. Okay, I can't stuff you around the wrong side of the mark. Right?
Green needs to turn around in a seamless-like manner, whatever that means.
Yeah, green can't go like, I'm around the mark. I'm just going to keep going this way. It's like, no, back to course. Come on. So you can think about it in some ways, it does boil down to fair sailing. Think about it, like what is the fair thing to do? You know, if you're in the yellow boat, what would it be if I was in the green boat's shoes? Give me some room. I'm going around a mark. You know, it'd be different if like, well, there's nothing out here. I want to go that way. Like, okay, fine, we can go that way. I could duck around, but green's like limited. Like I have to go this way. I'm committed to it. So you got to give me room. Your question, right? The purple and the blue boat. What's going on here, right? Was this what happened to you guys?
Similar. They were clear stern of us.
Yeah.
So if they gained overlap, they still owe you. They gain overlap within.
They gained overlap.
They are required to keep clear.
Yeah.
They actually are required to keep clear. It's evident. Yeah.
So this situation, right? We kind of talk about, we have these 2 boats. Who is required to keep clear? Purple boat is required to keep clear of the blue boat. However, the blue boat needs to do what? And actually a lot of room. Okay. Actually, a lot of
You're
room.
close hold, so you're just going to keep going straight until you can clear that other mark that's up near the top of the screen.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're just going to like slowly work your way around. No, you're going to go straight for a hot minute until you can make that happen because they're close hold. So that's going to be what 90, 110 degrees before they can turn. It's a while.
Right? Maybe there's another mark over here. Maybe they got to come all the way over here. Okay. They're inside of you. Give them room so they can go around the mark. You cannot stuff them into this zone.
Yeah.
Huh?
Another mark off.
There might be one here. Yeah. Well, eventually what it is you're probably going to have to tack and come around the backside of the crib. And you're going to have to, I would say the best thing to do is be sportsmanlike about it and communicate. What is going on? It's like
The way it usually works is the inside boat's going to keep going until he feels like he can tack and clear whatever the most extreme mark is. That might be 3 guard marks down, right? But you're going to tack when you feel like you can clear it. And then once you get to that next mark, then you slowly fall off, because you can fall off smoothly, right? But that tack is a barrier. All the way through the tack. Once you've tacked and you've cleared that next mark, then they can kind of ride you around. But they still need to give you room.
They give room. But room again doesn't mean they get to go wherever necessary. You're gonna make it around, and then still on the inside, you still got to give them room. Granted, if you are like speeding past them and they're clear astern, like you got all your room you got. I mean, technically they're still entitled to room, but it's like, what do you want me to do? Right? You're behind me. I've passed you. You know, you got all the lake you want. I've given it to you. It's all behind there. So you'll see. I think as it kind of goes out, you'll kind of see what happens.
And this is one of those things we want to encourage you all to get out there and sail, because it's one thing to sit here and talk and you know, look at these beautiful diagrams that make a lot of sense when we have 5 minutes to analyze each one, right? It's different when you're out there, and usually you'll see that unless you're sailing in a T10, people are pretty good about things. T10s are nutty.
Yes, they are. Yes. Sorry. Yes, they are. All right. So the next section is protests and penalties. So we've talked about all what we should be doing. What happens when you don't do what you should be doing? Protests and penalties. This is part 5, rules 60 through 71 and rule 44, if you want to look in your book. So protests. The definition of protest in the RS is an allegation made under Rule 60.2 by a boat, a race committee, a protest committee that a boat has broken a rule. Most cases, what you're going to see is like, yeah, basically anyone involved with that race can protest another boat. That's what it gets down to. Most commonly, what you're probably going to see is one boat is protesting another boat. We're basically a self-refereed sport, right? You go to Sail GP, they got umpires. Yeah. They have umpires. America's Cup has umpires. We don't have umpires. You're out there. If someone fouls you, doesn't give you room, doesn't keep clear of you, you're in that port starboard, and they are port, and they don't move, and you have to duck around them. Protest. We will settle it in the committee. There's actually a way to kind of get out of it. We'll talk about doing penalty turns. And I would say in many cases, that is your best bet. Own up to your mistake. Do your turn. And if you ever go into the protest committee and so-and-so says, you were on port, I was on starboard, I had to duck, you cost me my race. I protested you, and you go, but I did my penalty turns. Protest committee is going to say, well, that's it, done. It's over. He did it. He did his turns. What else you got to do? It's over. You know. We'll talk about that in a second. But yes, basically a circle. Basically, you've slowed yourself down. You know. Informing the protestee. This is what's also kind of important. The protesting boat shall inform the other boat at the first reasonable opportunity. She shall hail protest and conspicuously display a red flag. She shall display the red flag until she is no longer racing. That's actually really important. So get the little red flag. I have one. It's probably actually like in a drawer somewhere, which is probably not the best place to be if you're racing. You want to have it handy. So basically what you want to do is at the first reasonable opportunity. So, you know, obviously if it's happening right away and you're still in the middle of maneuver, finish your maneuver. Then yell protest and put the red flag out. Best place to put it is on your backstay, maybe a shroud. Backstay is usually the best. That's a good spot too. And then leave it, because then when you finish the race committee is going to go, oh, look at that. They protested someone. And we'll call you up. So, we see you have the red flag. Are you protesting someone? Would you like to file a protest? Sure enough, here's what happened.
I actually got out of a protest. I followed someone. They didn't say anything, and I didn't know they were upset about it. It was a port starboard thing. I didn't think they really ducked me, but apparently they did. They didn't put up their flag. They didn't say anything to me. And then I got, you know, finished the race, and I looked up online and it said I've been protested by these guys. And the whole thing was thrown out. And it's because the race committee, they were like, well, we saw you finish. Where's your flag? And they asked me, did you know you were being protested? And no, not until I walked in the door here. Otherwise, I'd have done my turn and it was over. So they didn't follow the procedure. And I followed them, right? Like they apparently had to duck me. I didn't think they did, but they did. It happens. It's a good idea to do that as well. It's a good idea. So you yell protest, put up your flag, and then again, when you have a minute, get on the thing. Hey, this is Zella 84044 protesting Blue Goose. Cool. And people sometimes people get grumpy. But that's why the whole reason you should tell them immediately is so that you can follow yourself. You can apologize by doing circles and then move on with your life, rather than having to go, to a hearing.
Yes, penalties. This is the best one. 44, that one. Penalties at the time of an incident, taking a penalty. A boat may take a 2-turn penalty, and she may have broken one or more of the rules in part 2. So it was all the right, when boat meets, so port, starboard, windward, leeward, in an incident while racing. I had this happen to me. It was a Wednesday night. It was actually a boat from another section. It was a light wind day. I was on starboard. They were on port. They thought they had enough room to get in front of me. They didn't. I had to duck them. I got pissed because I was really slow and I had to duck them and I was really slow and I yelled out, protest. And he got a little like, and then later we came in and I said, what's up? What did you do? What the heck? He's, I thought I had room. And so I'm like, you didn't. I go, you didn't. He goes, well, I did my turns. And I said, okay, let's go have a beer. Seriously, this is how it works. Oh, you did your turn. All done. And that's exactly what if you did the same thing. If I went in and filed a written protest, the protest committee, and the guys did my turns. Maybe they'll ask, like, did he? Do we have a witness? Maybe. But usually, like, he said he did his turns. It's the penalty. He's aware of it. It's like, hey, it happened. I'm sorry. I did my penalty turns. Let's move on with life. These two full circles. I will say, actually, this is Casra, though. Casra, in many of them, read the NORs. In many races, they actually reduce it down to 1 circle. So read your NORs and SIs.
And a circle is one tack, one jack.
One tack, circle. We'll show a picture next. The other one is there a 1-turn penalty when a boat has broken Rule 31, which is touching a mark. If you run into a mark, that is a penalty. You've hit part of the course. You're not supposed to do that. If you hit an obstruction, that's your own problem. You go out and you hit a government buoy, I don't care. But if you hit a mark of the course, to touch a mark of the course, that is a 1-turn penalty. I will talk about that later. It used to be, like a long time ago, you would round it again. They stopped that decades ago because it's a mess. They say just do a turn. We'll talk about that in a second. So 2-turn penalty. This is also what's really important when you look at this. After getting well clear of other boats, as soon after the incident as possible. So really clear. As soon as you can, once you're clear of everybody. It's the best thing to do is get it out a little bit. They protest you. All right, do I have a spot where I can do it? Let's not create another incident because you're doing the 720. They call it sometimes the 720 degrees, 2 circles. Get out of the way, kind of keep clear, find a clear spot. I will also say this, as soon as possible, the race committee is going to give you a lot of leeway on that one. You're in a pack, you're coming up to the mark, you foul someone, go around the mark, get clear of the mark, do your turns, right? Because you know what? It's not easy to get clear of everybody right there, right? So there's some stretch and as soon as possible. Granted, don't like foul someone down on the leeward end of the course and sail all the way up to windward and then do it after you do your windward rounding. Then they'd be like, seriously, you didn't have another time you could do it? You want to be reasonable, but you can stretch it a little bit. So don't feel like you got to create like another situation. Like, okay, get clear, get away from kind of everybody, do your turns, get back on the course, continue on racing.
And some people will try to to, they'll wait the entire race and then do their turns right in view of race committee, because they feel like, well, that way race committee will verify I did it. But then they're not doing it as, I mean, surely if you were following someone at the first mark of the course and you waited 2.5 hours to do your turns,
Yeah.
race committees will be like, yeah, we saw it, thank you.
I would say some race committee will let you go. They'll be like, they did do their turn, you know, and it's like, yes. Truthfully, what you should do is as soon as you can, once you're kind of clear of everyone, I think that's the key. People do it like, because, well, I want them to see that I've done it. There's race committee, they'd be like, yeah, that's fine. If it was like a casual race and I see someone do that, I'd be like, sure, that's fine. You're basically taking, you know, does it really matter if you take the penalty? I don't, you know, doesn't really matter. And a turn, any single turn. So if you do one turn or two turns, one turn will constitute one tack and one jibe. You gotta do it one tack, one jibe before you do anything else in terms of racing. You gotta do a tack and then a jibe. If you get through another tack to get back on the course, that's your problem. But we need one tack and one jibe that's related to the penalty. And if it's two turns, then that means a tack and a jibe, an attack and a jibe.
In sequence, so you can't do one turn still half an hour.
Exactly. That's another one. Yeah. That doesn't count it. Like tack, jibe, tack, jibe. Okay, you've done the turn. Here's an example. So 2-turn penalty we show here. We move along the purple boat, which is on port tack, failed to keep clear of the yellow boat that's on starboard tack. So what does the yellow boat do? Protest. Put the little white flag out. Yells protest. Purple boat says, oh yeah, I did that, didn't I? But he's got this green boat. So what does he do? Ducks the green boat. Gets out of the way of everyone. Now start doing its turn. So it's probably falling off, gonna do a jibe, do a tack, do another jibe, do a tack, and then I'm back off on my way, right? So basically when this purple boat is done, if it starts doing a jibe, must be on this board going this way, as if, you know, it was like originally here, before it can do any other maneuvers related to the course. So it can't be like, you know what, actually that way is better. So I'll jibe and I'll tack and I'll jibe and then I'll go this way. Nope, you got to do one more tack. And then if you decide I want to go that way on the course, then you have to tack again. You got to do 2 tacks and 2 jibes for that penalty. You can't like turn it into a maneuver. Yeah, you can do jibe, whatever the order is. You got to do that for your penalty, and then you can decide, oh, maybe I do want to go that way. Of course. Right? Maybe this purple boat was thinking like, oh, I was going to tack right here. Like that tack that you were going to do for racing doesn't count in your penalty. Does it so? A 1-turn example. This is also the classic. Please, if you ever hit a mark, just please, the best thing to do is get clear to your 360. The best place to do this is almost perpendicular to the mark, or you can think about it perpendicular to the course, right? And you'll see this here. So for example, this yellow boat and the purple boat comes in. Yellow boat rubs up against the mark. They've hit the mark, right? So what's the yellow boat going to do? Best thing you to do is just kind of run perpendicular course. Everybody's going to be coming around here, going around like this. Get out of the way. You know what? I'm even going to go a little bit downwind. Like there's no one going to come over here. And I'm going to do a jibe. I'm going to do a tack. And then, you know, maybe I'm going to do a tack to go this way. I'm going to go that way. Clear. Just get out of the way. Big one. Don't round the mark again. Don't round the mark again. I see this in the 420 sailing all the time. They hit the mark and then they come around again and there's like 4 boats coming down on them. I'm like, ah. Get out of the way. Eli did that once too. And I'm like, Eli, just do a turn. Get out of everybody's way and do a turn. They're like, no, I gotta go around again, right? Like, no, you don't. So the kind of like the last little bit, protest. So we did kind of like, you do the verbal protest, someone someone follows or whatever, you protest them. Yeah, if someone hits the mark and you see them don't do a 360, technically you can protest them. No, it's accepted. I don't know how stickly you want to be, like, you know, race your own course. I don't know. It's hard to say. But what I would say is normally what you do is you do the protest. Someone probably does the penalty turns on the course. And then you might just say, like, that's all I need to do. If you need to file a written protest, because I want to like get in front of a committee because maybe they did something really egregious. You know, they were very unsportsmanlike to me. I got damaged or something like that. I had to withdraw from the race because of what happened. Now it becomes egregious. And maybe I need to file a written protest. And so technically, if you look at it, a protest must be in writing and identify all these different things. And you can go to rule 61.2 and RS tells you everything that you need for the protest.
The app you can fill out.
The app has it fill out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they even have a little diagram. You can put the boats to show where the boats are. Kind of like a road accident, right? You've ever done that, right? I was here. They were there. They did this to me. Protest forms may be available. If one is not provided, you can do that. Sailing, there's a protest form that's available online as well. If you want something printed like a PDF and you can fill it out. One thing that's really important, be aware of the time limit if you are filing a written protest. If you go out and go protest and the person does their 720, you see their 720 and then the race committee, you come in and be like, are you filing a protest? It's like, well, so-and-so did a port starboard, but I saw they did their turn. So I'm not gonna do any paperwork. You're like, okay, thanks. Thanks for letting us know. And that would be it. Like, you would just basically drop it. There's no need to get anyone else involved. But if you're like, no, they fouled me and I got damaged and I had to withdraw and like all these things, now you got to go file it. Look in your NORs and your SIs. It's normally in the SIs. What is the time limit for filing a protest? There's usually a specific time limit. 2 hours after the last boat that finished, maybe, or something like that. If you file it after that, even matter how egregious it was, race committee is going to go, nope, not taking it. It's past the time limit. Because to be honest, we don't want to deal with protests. We really don't want to do it. So get it in. If it's serious and you need to do it, get it in. You can if you're like, hey, I have got damage and I got to go my thing. I don't know if I'm going to file it in time. Call them up and communicate them. Know that you're on your radar. That will be fine as well. Like, okay, get us that as soon as possible. But you basically communicated and you know that. Don't be like showing up later after you've gone to the rum party. Oh, by the way, so-and-so did this to me. Here's my protest form. Like, that ain't gonna. So make sure that you have it. If there is no limit stated in the SIs, the default, according to the racing rules of sailing, is 2 hours after the last boat in the race finishes. That's it. So if they don't say anything in the SIs, that applies. So be mindful of when that is. Any questions on that? Yes. Yes. Yes, you can. Any other questions? Yes, it's called redress. This is Racing Rule 62. A boat can request redress. This is basically an adjustment of your score or standing based upon, it can be an improper action or admission of the race committee, protest committee, organizing authority, technical committee. Please don't do it unless it's egregious. We really don't like it when people do this.
You're complaining to the race committee about how they ran the race.
Yeah.
All that comes.
You know, your flag was a second late. Yeah. I mean, if the race committee does do something egregiously wrong with the conduct of the race, you know, the starting sequence was just like completely off and no one knew what the heck was going on. And like everybody, sure, but like they're people. So, you know, give them a little leeway. They're exactly, that's the other thing. We're all not paid. We get a sandwich. I think that's our payment. We get a sandwich, maybe sometimes a drink, you know, it's about it. But you can, in theory, do it. But, you know, also don't be that guy who's always protesting the race committee because you didn't like this, or didn't like that. There's been some of those in the community. Not many of them are racing anymore. No, not in this room. I say some of them I don't think race anymore because it's just like, you know, it's like, you think about it like, you know, your kids and you went out to play ball and you got the one guy who's like always like, well, no, first base should be right here. And you're like, you know, I'm not going to play with you anymore. Injury or damage because of an action of a boat that was breaking rule in part 2, or took an appropriate penalty or was penalized. So, you know, if you're in a situation, someone part starboard and they damage your boat, you can continue to race. Even if they did you turns, you can continue to race. You can go ask for redress. It's a good one. Providing aid, except to yourself, in compliance with Rule 1.1. Yes, if someone on your boat falls overboard, you can't ask for that time to come off.
Otherwise, people push each other overboard.
Well, there's no wind. We're going nowhere anyways.
Well, give them aid. Yeah. That's what I come back to. Record the time that you have stopped racing. Record the time that you continue to race again, and you basically fill out a redress request to the race committee, and you file it in as a protest. So basically, it's considered like a protest, if you will, even though you're not really protesting anyone. But yes, file that. Race committee will be happy for anyone who gave aid to anyone else in a honest situation. In that case, you will be happy to adjust scores because everybody has to be safe.
And that was a real life thing. The Vendée Globe 2 years ago, there's a boat off of South Africa that broke in half the same. And a bunch of competitors went, because there's Southern Ocean with no one around, went and diverted to go help. And it actually ended up in the final stand that moved the guy from like third, because race committee gave him like, in the middle of nowhere, so like 2 days worth of time back or something like that. So, and it happens.
And of course, any action of another boat that would result in a penalty. So any of the rule breaking that you could say, you can, if you had an action of another boat that they then had to take a penalty, you can request redress for yourself. Granted, if someone is on port and starboard and you had to duck them, we're not going to give you time for the duck. You just had to duck them. I'm sorry. We're not going to go, you want 3 seconds or 2? You want 2 or 3? But if it's like egregious, yeah, you can file for redress. Sure.
So let's say you have at the start of the match.
Yeah.
And it was failed.
Yeah.
If you hear that, and at the time the wind, it was pretty rough wind, to really try and go back and pick up a man overboard, you'd probably be better off under power.
So you, as soon as you say I am no longer racing, yes, you can put your engine on. I've stopped racing. I'm rendering aid. You're not racing right now. And then once you regain racing, which at one point when you're now racing again, your engine better be off.
And that was one of the issues with the boat that had the first one before, is they were, because you can't get time back for rendering aid to yourself, right?
They didn't.
One of their mistakes, if you read the report that came out, is they tried to keep racing. So they didn't turn the engine on. And so they had a difficult time, especially because of nasty, of controlling the boat, which made it more difficult. That's why they couldn't recover the guys quick, because they could have, if they had perhaps decided to quit racing, because they knew they wouldn't get redress. I mean, if you read the report, it's pretty damning. They did a lot of things wrong, and that was a big one. If they didn't turn on the engine and drop sail.
They did a lot of things wrong. They did a lot of things that if you read it, is definitely they were in the mindset of we'll just pick them up when we keep going. But in many ways, like they didn't realize that the race was over for them. And they should have render aid. The other boats, I think all those other boats, I mean, they all got credit. There was no questions asked. They came in and actually they had the tracker. They were also, I see when you left, I see when you started to go back on the course. They just were just subtracting that time.
All the way back to your initial position. So if you have to sail back to help someone, you get redressed to get back to your original
Where you were basically going back to race. Yeah. want everybody to come home. So we'll get that.
I've seen that happen with penalty issues. So the protestee got docked instead of the protestor getting awarded time. And I think that's generally race committee trying to not, it would be unfair if you got a time credit and that moved you up as someone that had nothing to do with the issue, right? It's more fair to penalize the guy who was wrong than it is to award you arbitrarily.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a port starboard issue, right? Like, yeah, they're penalizing the protestee.
I think,
instead of
yeah, I was gonna say, actually, in those cases, if you have someone in like, you know, most cases, I would say the protest committee, if you had someone depart starboard and they didn't do their turns, you're gonna get a severe scoring penalty, maybe even a disqualification for that race. Because it's just like, no, you know, but that's also comes back to the best and easiest thing to do is do your turns right then and there. Because also, if you do your turns right then and there, I'll be honest, you can usually make up the time in some cases. If you're out there, if the course is long enough, you could probably pull that back in, you know? So it really becomes the smallest penalty out there than having to go into the committee room and the committee says disqualified. I mean, that's just, you know, or disqualified, not excludable from your score. So it's like really heavy. Like you go out there and do a turns and maybe you drop a place. Maybe, right? It's always best is own up to your mistake and do your turns. And then it also makes race committee life easy. We don't have to listen to people complain about things. Granted, if it's a serious and egregious situation, file a protest too, right? Damage happens, you're no longer able to sail.
Again, that also will come down to your insurance. They're gonna want to see that.
Yeah. Summary. So if making a protest, make sure that you do it at the first reasonable opportunity. Hail the word protest, conspicuously display your red flag, and continue to just fly that flag for the rest of the race. Granted, if you have to protest twice, God help you. We've never had that situation. But you know, it's already up, protest. If you violated a rule, the best thing to do is just take the penalty at the time after getting well clear of the other boats as soon as possible, right? There's a lot of leeway there. You can use the leeway, it's fine. But, you know, just don't make a bad situation worse. That's what it gets down to, right? Don't create another conflict and another issue. If needs be, you can file a written protest. You can request redress if sustained an injury or damage, you were forced to drop out. And also if you had to provide help or aid to another boat or its member or its crew. So that's basically it for what we have. We have the whole summary. We went over the race documents. I do have some examples. If people want to look at it, we can discuss it. I think, you know, I'll be here for a little while. Big ones is looking at those course, you know, be aware of your course layout marks. What are your, you know, what are the dates and the courses for your event? Look in the NOR. That's going to tell you that's going to tell you kind of the generics of what's going to happen in the event, what's the eligibility. Then in your SI, what is your course? What are you going around? What do the marks look like? What flags are they going to use? That sort of thing. Be mindful of your starting sequence and who's in front of you. What does their flag look like, right? We used to use it, write it out and have it like on a little sheet. Do you know pencil works really great on white fiberglass? That's awesome. Notes all over the place. And then you just erase them with the eraser. Pencil works wonders on white fiberglass. Yeah, smooth white fiberglass. You write all over the place. Or tape it up. Get the painter's tape, right? Put the thing up there. Be sure what you need to do if you meet another boat. You know, remember, port must keep clear of starboard, windward must keep clear of leeward. If there's an overlap, clear ahead, clear astern. You know, are there any limitations? This does get a little bit tricky. I think the best thing to do is just start going out there and you'll kind of get a handle of it. Best thing to do is just really be conservative. All else fails, just give the other person room. Get out of the way for right now to get it. And if a boat does not keep clear or give room, you got the protest and the potential penalties. Thanks everyone for coming. We do have an online Google form for feedback. There's a QR code, there's the URL. Please fill that out. We'll take your feedback seriously. We do the next version of this course. Anybody have any questions? We're here for a while. There's always snacks too. Thank you. Ain't that the truth?